Sometimes the things we inherit aren't worth much in dollars, but they carry the weight of a lifetime. Mae Trulane stood in front of her late grandfather's machine shop, holding a key that felt heavier than it should. The whole town of Bitterridge thought she was crazy. All she got was a building full of rust and broken tools. People whispered and shook their heads as she walked past. But Mae had something they didn't, a note from her grandfather that said, "For when the world forgets how things were made." Inside that dusty workshop, hidden under years of neglect, was something that would change her life forever. What did her grandfather protect for 40 years? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The bus ride from Portland had taken 6 hours, but for Mae Trulane the real distance couldn't be measured in miles. 30 years. That's how long it had been since she'd last seen Bitterridge, and from the window of the Greyhound it looked like time had forgotten this place entirely. The old lumber mill stood silent against the mountain backdrop, its smokestacks cold and empty. Main Street had maybe a dozen businesses left, half of them with faded "for lease" signs in the windows. The hardware store was still there, Keppel's, the sign read, same as it always had. The diner looked the same too, though the paint had faded from red to a tired pink. Mae shifted her rucksack on her shoulder as she stepped off the bus. At 57, she shouldn't be starting over with everything she owned packed into one bag, but life had a way of humbling you when you least expected it. The divorce had taken most of her savings. The job at the Portland Library had ended when they cut staff. And then, 3 weeks ago, the letter arrived from a lawyer she'd never heard of, informing her that her grandfather, Ezra Trulane, had passed away at the age of 98 and left her his property in Bitterridge. She hadn't seen Ezra since she was 27, hadn't said goodbye when she left, hadn't returned his letters, all 3 of them, carefully written in his precise machinist's hand. The guilt sat heavy in her chest, right alongside the grief. "Mae Trulane," the voice came from behind her. "Didn't think you'd actually show up." She turned to find Vernon Keppel standing on the sidewalk, hands in the pockets of his canvas work jacket. He was older now, his hair completely white, but she recognized him immediately. He'd been Ezra's friend, back when Ezra still had friends in this town. "Vernon," she said, managing a small smile. "It's been a long time." "That it has." His expression was difficult to read. "You here to sell the place, I imagine?" "I don't know yet," Mae said honestly. "I haven't even seen it." "Well." Vernon glanced down the street toward where the old machine shop sat, 2 blocks past the shuttered mill. "It's still standing, if that's what you're wondering. Nobody's touched it since Ezra passed. He made sure the taxes were paid up for 5 years, so you've got time to figure out what you want to do." Mae felt something catch in her throat. Even at the end, Ezra had been thinking ahead, trying to take care of her. "That sounds like him." Vernon's jaw tightened. "He was a good man, Mae. Better than this town ever gave him credit for." Before she could ask what he meant, Vernon tipped his head in a brief farewell and walked back toward his store. Mae watched him go, a familiar unease settling over her. There had always been something complicated about Ezra's relationship with Bitterridge, something her mother never wanted to talk about. "Your grandfather is a proud man," her mother used to say, "too proud to know when to let things go." Mae had never understood what that meant. She'd been too young to pay attention to adult troubles, and by the time she was old enough to ask questions, her parents had moved them to Eugene, putting distance between themselves and whatever shadow hung over the Trulane name in Bitterridge. The walk to the machine shop took her past the diner, where 2 older women sat in the window booth. They looked up as she passed, their conversation stopping mid-sentence. Mae kept her eyes forward, but she could feel their stares following her down the sidewalk. The workshop sat at the end of a gravel lot, a low-slung building with weathered grey siding and a peaked roof. A rusted chain-link fence surrounded the property, sagging in places. The sign above the door had faded almost to nothing, but Mae could still make out the words, Trulane Machine Works. Her hand trembled slightly as she pulled the brass key from her jacket pocket. It was small and old-fashioned, the kind that belonged to a different era. The lawyer had sent it along with the deed and a sealed envelope. Inside the envelope was a note, written in Ezra's careful script, "For when the world forgets how things were made." Mae had read those words 100 times on the bus ride, trying to parse their meaning. It sounded like something Ezra would say. He'd always been particular about craftsmanship, about doing things the right way, even when the quick way was easier. But there was something else in those words too, something that felt like a message she wasn't quite equipped to decode. The key slid into the lock with surprising ease. The door opened with a long, complaining creak that echoed across the empty lot. The smell hit her first machine oil and sawdust, metal, and time. It was the smell of her childhood summers, of long afternoons spent watching Ezra work at his bench, his hands steady and sure as he shaped raw metal into something useful. For a moment she was 8 years old again, perched on a stool, asking endless questions while he patiently explained the purpose of each tool, each measurement. Mae stepped inside and let her eyes adjust to the dimness. Weak, afternoon light filtered through dirty windows, illuminating a space that seemed frozen in time. The main workbench dominated the center of the room, its surface scarred and stained but still solid. Tools hung on pegboards along the walls, each one outlined in faded paint so Ezra would know exactly where it belonged. A drill press stood in one corner, a lathe in another. Chains and pulleys hung from the ceiling beams. Cabinets with narrow drawers lined one wall, the kind used for storing small parts, nuts and bolts and washers sorted by size. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, but underneath the neglect, Mae could see the order. Ezra had been meticulous. Nothing was random. Every tool had its place, every surface had its purpose. She walked slowly through the space, her boots leaving prints in the dust. The back corner of the workshop was darker, stacked with wooden crates and covered equipment. Beside it, a smaller crate sat alone, a canvas cover tied down over its top. Mae felt drawn to that covered crate, though she couldn't say why. Something about the way it sat apart from everything else, the care that had been taken to protect it. But before she could investigate, a voice from the doorway made her jump. "You're Mae, aren't you?" She turned to find a young man standing in the entrance, backlit by the afternoon sun. He was maybe 19 or 20, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, work boots caked with dried mud. "I am," Mae said, her heart still racing from the surprise. "And you are?" "Tommy Rawls." He stepped inside, pulling off a worn baseball cap. "My family lives just up the road. I saw you come in and thought I'd introduce myself." He glanced around the workshop with something like reverence. "I used to come by sometimes, when Mr. Trulane was still around. He'd let me watch him work, tried to teach me a few things about metalwork." Mae felt a pang of something, jealousy, maybe, or regret. She'd had years with Ezra when she was young, but then she'd walked away. This boy had gotten the time she'd given up. "He was good at teaching," Mae said quietly. "The best." Tommy moved farther into the room, running his hand along the edge of the workbench. "He told me once that a good machinist could fix anything, build anything, as long as he understood how things were supposed to work. Said the problem with the modern world was that nobody understood how things worked anymore." That sounded exactly like something Ezra would say. Mae smiled despite herself. "I'm sorry for your loss," Tommy added. "Mr. Trulane, he was special. A lot of folks around here didn't appreciate that, but he was." There it was again, that hint of something unspoken, some old wound that Mae didn't understand. "Tommy," she said carefully, "why do people in this town act like my grandfather was someone to be ashamed of?" The young man's expression shifted, becoming guarded. "It's not my place to say, ma'am. That's old history, and I only know bits and pieces." But he hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. If you're planning to stick around for a bit, you should talk to Betsy Kimball at the library. She was here for all of it. She'd know the whole story. The whole story of what? Tommy shook his head. Like I said, it's not my place. But Mr. Trulane, he wasn't what people said he was. I know that much. He put his cap back on. Anyway, if you need any help around here cleaning up, moving things, whatever, I've got time. Just come find me. The Rawls place is the blue house at the end of Cedar Street. Thank you, Mae said. I appreciate that. After Tommy left, Mae stood alone in the silent workshop. The covered crate in the corner seemed to pull at her attention, but something held her back from opening it. Instead, she found herself drawn to a nail beside the door, where an old leatherwork apron hung. She lifted it carefully, half expecting it to fall apart in her hands. But the leather was still supple, well oiled and cared for. Mae brought it to her face and inhaled. Machine, oil and pine, sweat and time. It smelled like Ezra. It smelled like home, or at least the closest thing to home she'd known as a child. The tears came suddenly, surprising her with their intensity. She pressed the apron to her face and let herself cry for Ezra, for the years she'd lost, for the confusion and guilt that had kept her away, for the fact that she'd never said goodbye, never told him she understood, even if she didn't fully understand what there was to understand. When the tears finally subsided, Mae carefully hung the apron back on its nail. She wiped her eyes and looked around the workshop with new determination. She didn't know what Ezra had wanted her to find here, or why he'd left her this place. But she owed it to him to figure it out. The motel was cheap and tired, the kind of place that rented rooms by the week to truck drivers and construction workers passing through. Mae paid for 3 nights, figuring that would be enough time to assess the property and decide whether to sell or, well, she didn't know what the alternative might be. In the small diner attached to the motel, she ordered coffee and a turkey sandwich. The waitress was young and disinterested, barely making eye contact as she took the order. But at the table behind Mae, 2 older men were talking, their voices carrying in the near-empty space. "Heard Ezra Trulane's granddaughter is in town," one of them said. "That's so? She come to claim that worthless shop?" "Guess so. Saw her walking down Main Street with a backpack like some kind of vagrant. Well, she won't get much for it. Nobody wants that place. Too much bad history. Shame, really. Building solid enough. But you couldn't pay me to work in there. Not after what happened." Mae's hands tightened around her coffee cup. She wanted to turn around and demand to know what they were talking about, but something stopped her. Instead, she sat very still and listened. "You really think old Ezra was responsible?" the first man asked. "Who else? He built that equipment, didn't he? And when it failed," the man's voice dropped lower, "3 men dead. That's not something you forget." Mae's breath caught. 3 men dead, equipment that failed. She had no idea what they were talking about, but the weight of it settled over her like a shroud. The waitress brought her sandwich, and the men's conversation shifted to other topics: fishing, the weather, someone's grandson who'd gotten a job in Portland. Mae ate mechanically, her mind racing. Back in her motel room, she lay awake on the thin mattress, staring at the water-stained ceiling. Ezra had left her a key and a note, a workshop full of tools and dust and secrets. And somewhere in this town, there was a story, a tragedy that everyone seemed to know except her. For when the world forgets how things were made. Mae turned the words over in her mind, looking for meaning. Was it just a meditation on craftsmanship, or was it something more? A clue? A challenge? Tomorrow, she decided, she would start looking for answers. She would talk to Betsy Kimball at the library. She would go through the workshop more carefully. She would find out what happened and why Ezra's name still carried the weight of suspicion 30 years after she'd left. Outside her window, Bitterridge settled into the quiet darkness of a town that had seen better days. Somewhere in that darkness, Ezra's machine shop stood waiting, holding secrets Mae was only beginning to suspect existed. Mae woke early, her body still on Portland time. The weak morning light filtered through the motel's thin curtains, casting everything in shades of grey. She dressed quickly, jeans, a work shirt, boots, and stopped at the diner for coffee and toast before heading to the workshop. The brass key felt familiar in her hand now. She unlocked the door and stepped into the cool dimness, flipping the light switch out of habit. To her surprise, the overhead fluorescence flickered to life. Vernon must have kept the utilities running, or maybe Ezra had arranged for that too. In the harsh light, the workshop looked both better and worse than it had yesterday. Better because she could see the true condition of the equipment, old but well-maintained, salvageable with effort. Worse because the dust and neglect were more obvious, the sense of abandonment more complete. Mae had brought cleaning supplies from the motel's housekeeping cart, rags, a broom, a bucket. She started with the workbench, wiping away years of accumulated dust. Underneath, the wood was scarred but solid, marked with decades of measurements and notations carved directly into the surface. She worked methodically, the way Ezra had taught her. One section at a time, one task completed before moving to the next. As she cleaned, she began to notice details she'd missed in yesterday's dim light. The tools weren't just organized, they were pristine. Someone, probably Ezra himself right up until the end, had kept them oiled and rust-free. The pegboard outlines weren't just functional, they were labeled in neat handwriting, each tool's name and size marked clearly. After an hour, Mae turned her attention to the cabinets along the wall. The narrow drawers were the kind used in machine shops for organizing small parts. She opened them one by one, finding exactly what she expected: nuts, bolts, washers, springs, each size sorted and labeled. But the bottom drawer was different. Instead of hardware, it contained papers, invoices, receipts, correspondence. Mae pulled out a handful and carried them to the workbench, where the light was better. Most of it was routine. Orders for custom parts, repairs completed, payments received. Ezra's handwriting covered everything, his careful notations tracking work from request to completion. The dates ranged from the 1952 through the early 2000s, a chronicle of small-town industry slowly fading away. Then Mae found the ledger. It was tucked at the very back of the drawer, wrapped in oilcloth. The binding was hand-stitched leather, the pages yellowed but intact. She opened it carefully, mindful of its age. The first entry was dated April 1947. Ezra would have been 21 then, just back from the war, starting his business. The entries were meticulous: date, client name, work performed, payment received. Mae traced her finger down the pages, watching the years accumulate. There were lean times and busy times, the rhythm of a working life laid bare in columns of figures. But as she moved deeper into the ledger, around 1955, something changed. New entries appeared, marked with asterisks. The client names were abbreviated: TB, CNT, DOD. The descriptions were vague: specialized components, precision work, confidential, commission. The payments were substantial, far more than Ezra charged for his regular work. Mae flipped forward, finding more of these marked entries throughout the late 50s and early 60s. Then, abruptly, they stopped. The last asterisked entry was dated March 1962. After that, the ledger returned to normal routine repairs, standard work, modest payments. March 1962. Mae tried to remember if that date meant anything. Her mother had been born in 1960, which would make Mae's grandmother pregnant or newly delivered in 1962. Mae herself wouldn't be born until 1968. What had happened in March 1962 that changed everything? She was so absorbed in the ledger that she didn't hear the workshop door open. "Didn't expect to see you here so early." Mae looked up to find Vernon Keppel standing just inside the doorway. He held a paper bag in one hand and a thermos in the other. "Brought you some breakfast," he said, setting them on the workbench. "Figured you might be the type to skip meals when you're working." "Thank you," Mae said, genuinely touched. That's kind of you. Vernon glanced at the ledger lying open on the bench. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe, or concern. Finding anything interesting? I'm not sure yet. Mae hesitated, then decided to be direct. Vernon, what happened in 1962? Something changed for Ezra that year. The work in this ledger, it just stops. Vernon was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful. That was the year of the mill fire. The fire, Mae repeated, remembering the conversation she'd overheard at the diner. 3 men died. 3 men died, Vernon confirmed. And your grandfather was blamed, though it was never proven, not officially anyway. Mae felt cold. Blamed for what, exactly? The equipment failed. A braking system on one of the main saws. It was supposed to be fail-safe, but it wasn't. When it gave out, the saw kicked back. Killed 2 men instantly, crushed another who died later at the hospital. Vernon's expression was grim. Ezra had done work on that equipment, custom modifications for the mill owner. When it failed, people said it was his fault. Said he'd cut corners, used inferior parts. But you don't think he did? I know he didn't. Vernon's voice was firm. I was his apprentice back then, Mae. I was there when he worked on that system. He was meticulous. He double-checked everything, used the best materials. If that equipment failed, it wasn't because of anything Ezra did wrong. Then why was he blamed? Vernon looked away. Because it was easier than blaming the mill owner. Harrison Voss was the richest man in 3 counties. He owned half the town, employed a quarter of its people. When something went wrong at his mill, it couldn't be his fault. It had to be the machinist's fault, the small guy, the one without lawyers and influence. Mae's anger rose sharp and sudden. That's not justice. No, Vernon agreed. It's not. But it's how things worked back then. Still works that way, if we're being honest. He paused. Ezra tried to fight it. Hired a lawyer, gathered evidence, swore up and down that someone had tampered with his work. But nobody wanted to hear it. The insurance paid out, the families were compensated, and everyone wanted to move on. Everyone except Ezra. He never moved on, Mae said quietly. No. He spent years trying to prove what really happened. Cost him most of his friends, cost him business. Eventually, it cost him his family too. Vernon met her eyes. Your mother, she couldn't take it anymore. The shame, the gossip, the way people looked at her. She married your father and got out of Bitterridge as fast as she could. Mae thought about her mother, who had died 5 years ago, without ever speaking about Ezra's work or his reputation. About her father, who had discouraged any talk of Bitterridge or the Trulane family history. She'd always assumed it was just old family drama, the kind every family had. She'd never imagined it ran this deep. Why are you telling me this? Mae asked. Because you're here, Vernon said simply. Because you're asking questions. And because, he hesitated, because maybe it's time someone listened. Ezra never stopped believing the truth mattered. Maybe he was right. After Vernon left, Mae sat alone with the ledger, her breakfast untouched. She flipped back to those asterisked entries, looking at them with new understanding. Specialized work, confidential commissions, government contracts maybe, or industrial secrets. Ezra hadn't just been a small-town machinist. He'd been skilled enough, trusted enough to do work that others couldn't. And then it had all come crashing down. Mae turned to the last pages of the ledger, where the entries became sparse and the amounts smaller. Ezra, struggling to rebuild after his reputation was destroyed. Ezra, watching his business fade and his family leave. Tucked into the very back of the ledger, she found a photograph. It was black and white, the edges soft with age. 5 men stood in front of some kind of machinery, large, industrial, unlike anything Mae recognized. Ezra was on the left, younger than she'd ever seen him, maybe in his early 30s. He was smiling, looking proud. The other men were dressed in suits, official-looking. On the back of the photograph, someone had written names and a date. Project Nightingale Team, November 1958, E. Trulane, H. Voss, R. Caldwell, J. Marsh, T. Chen. Harrison Voss, the mill owner, the man who had blamed Ezra for the fire. Mae stared at the photograph, her mind racing. These men had worked together, collaborated on something significant. What had happened between 1958 and 1962 to turn them into enemies? She pulled out her phone and took pictures of the ledger pages, the photograph, everything that seemed significant. Then she wrapped the ledger back in its oilcloth and tucked it carefully into her bag. The library was 3 blocks away, a small brick building that looked like it had been built in the 30s. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of old books and floor polish. A woman sat behind the circulation desk, her white hair pulled back in a neat bun, reading glasses perched on her nose. "Excuse me," Mae said. "Are you Betsy Kimball?" The woman looked up and studied Mae for a long moment. "I am. And you're Mae Trulane. I heard you were in town." "Everyone seems to have heard," Mae said dryly. Betsy smiled slightly. "Small town. Not much happens here that doesn't make the rounds." She set down her book. "What can I do for you?" Mae pulled out her phone and showed Betsy the photograph of the 5 men. "I found this in my grandfather's workshop. I'm trying to understand what it means. What Project Nightingale was." Betsy's expression shifted, becoming more serious. She gestured for Mae to follow her to a back room, away from the main library. Once the door was closed, she spoke quietly. "Your grandfather did contract work during the Cold War, precision machining for sensitive projects. Most of it was classified at the time, though I doubt it matters much now. He was very good at what he did. Good enough that government contractors sought him out. Like what kind of projects? I don't know the specifics. Nobody did, except the men involved. But I know Ezra was proud of that work. He believed he was serving his country, using his skills for something that mattered." Betsy paused. "And then the mill fire happened, and everything changed." "Vernon told me about the fire," Mae said. "About how Ezra was blamed. Vernon was there. He knows. More than most." Betsy folded her hands on the table. "What Vernon might not have told you is that there were people who didn't believe the official story. People who thought the equipment had been sabotaged." Mae's breath caught. "Sabotaged? By who?" "That was never proven, but there were rumors. Business disputes, patent disagreements, the usual jealousies that crop up in small towns." Betsy met Mae's eyes. "Your grandfather believes someone deliberately destroyed his work to cover up theft. He spent the last 30 years of his life trying to prove it. And did he? I don't know. He stopped talking about it openly after a while. But he never stopped investigating. Every few months, he'd come in here, request old newspapers on microfilm, copies of public records. He was looking for something, right up until the end." Mae felt the weight of it settling over her. Ezra hadn't just been wrongly accused. He'd been fighting a battle that no one else could see, pursuing justice that everyone else had forgotten. "Betsy," Mae said slowly, "if I wanted to find out what really happened, where would I start?" The librarian considered this. The county records office might have the investigation reports from the fire. The patent office would have records of any designs Ezra filed, and she hesitated. Harrison Voss is dead, but his company still exists. If there was theft, if someone stole Ezra's work, there might be evidence in their files. Mae nodded slowly. "Thank you for being honest with me. Your grandfather was a good man, Mae. He deserved better than what this town gave him." Betsy's voice was gentle but firm. "If you're planning to dig into this, be prepared. Not everyone will want the truth to come out. Some people have built their lives on the version of events they prefer to believe." Walking back to the workshop, Mae felt the town watching her. Or maybe that was just paranoia, the weight of knowing that she was no longer just the granddaughter who'd inherited a building. She was becoming the woman asking questions, and questions had a way of making people uncomfortable. Inside the workshop, Mae stood in front of the covered crate in the corner. Whatever was under that canvas, Ezra had wanted her to find it. He'd protected it, kept it safe for 40 years. She untied the ropes, holding the cover in place, and pulled the canvas away. Inside the crate, carefully wrapped in protective cloth, was a mass of twisted metal, charred, broken, but clearly labeled in Ezra's handwriting, with tags identifying each component and notations about modifications and failures. It was the brake assembly from the mill fire, the actual equipment that had killed 3 men, and Ezra had kept it all these years, preserving the evidence that everyone else wanted to forget. Mae stared at the twisted metal for a long time, her hands shaking slightly. This wasn't just evidence, it was proof that Ezra had never given up, that he'd kept fighting even when no one was listening. The careful labels, the detailed notations, the way each piece had been preserved, it spoke of a man who believed that truth would eventually matter. She photographed everything from multiple angles, making sure to capture Ezra's handwriting on each tag. Then she carefully covered the crate again, her mind already racing ahead to what this meant. If Ezra had kept the failed equipment, he must have had access to it right after the fire. That meant he'd examined it, understood what went wrong. The question was, had anyone else seen this? Had anyone else understood what Ezra was trying to prove? Mae pulled out the photograph she'd found in the ledger, the one from 1958, showing Ezra with Harrison Voss and 3 other men. She studied each face, trying to read their expressions. They looked like colleagues, maybe even friends. Whatever had destroyed that relationship must have happened later, somewhere between this photograph and the fire in 1962. She needed more information. The library was a start, but Betsy had mentioned the county records office. If there had been an investigation into the fire, there would be reports, testimony, maybe even technical analysis of the failed equipment. The county courthouse was in Millbrook, 20 miles away. Mae didn't have a car, hadn't needed one in Portland, where she'd walked or taken the bus everywhere. But the motel clerk had mentioned a local taxi service, such as it was. She called the number and was told someone would be there in 20 minutes. While she waited, Mae went back to the cabinet where she'd found the ledger. She pulled out the remaining papers, looking for anything else that might be relevant. Most of it was routine invoices, receipts, correspondence with suppliers. But near the bottom of the drawer, she found a manila folder labeled simply 1962. Inside were newspaper clippings, all yellowed with age. The headlines told the story: 3 dead in mill fire, investigation underway after tragic accident, equipment failure, blamed in worker deaths. Mae read through each article carefully. The coverage was straightforward: a terrible accident, a mechanical failure, 3 families devastated. There was mention of an investigation, but the articles suggested it would be routine, focused on safety, compliance, rather than criminal negligence. One article, dated 2 weeks after the fire, included a quote from Harrison Voss: "This tragedy has shaken our entire community. We are working closely with investigators to determine exactly what happened. Our priority is ensuring this never happens again." Noble words, but nowhere in any of the articles was Ezra's name mentioned. The blame, such as it was, seemed to fall on abstract equipment failure rather than any specific person or company. The taxi arrived, a weathered pickup truck driven by a man who introduced himself as Dale. He didn't ask questions, just nodded when Mae said she needed to go to the courthouse. The drive took them through landscape that was achingly familiar. Dense forest, sharp mountains, the occasional glimpse of a river cutting through the valley. This was the country Mae had grown up in, the place that had shaped her childhood. Leaving it had been necessary at the time, but sitting in Dale's truck, watching the mountains pass by, she felt the complicated pull of home. The courthouse was an old stone building, imposing and formal. Inside, the records office was staffed by a tired-looking woman named Phyllis, who directed Mae to the public records request forms. "What are you looking for?" Phyllis asked, not unkindly. "Reports on a fire investigation from 1962. The Bitterridge mill fire." Phyllis's expression shifted slightly. "That's going back a ways. Most of our records from that era are still on paper, stored in the basement. It might take a while to locate." "I have time," Mae said. While Phyllis disappeared into the depths of the building, Mae sat in the waiting area, her phone in her hand. She pulled up a search engine and typed in Harrison Voss, Timber Mill 1962. The results were sparse. A few brief mentions in logging industry journals, obituaries for Voss when he died in 1995. Nothing about the fire, nothing about the investigation. It was as if the entire incident had been quietly erased from the official record. But then Mae tried a different search. Harrison Voss patents machinery. This time, she found something. A patent filed in 1961, approved in 1963, for an improved safety braking system for industrial sawmill equipment. The patent holder was listed as Harrison Voss, with Consolidated Timber Industries as the assignee. Mae stared at the screen, her heart pounding. A braking system, the exact type of equipment that had failed in the fire. Patented by Voss, approved 2 years after the accident that killed 3 workers. She clicked through to the patent details, looking at the technical drawings. They were complex, beyond her ability to fully understand, but certain elements jumped out: the precision components, the fail-safe mechanisms, the exact specifications that would require a skilled machinist to produce. The kind of work Ezra specialized in. Phyllis returned, carrying a large accordion folder. "Found it," she said, setting it on the counter with a soft thud. "Investigation report, witness statements, the whole file. You can review it here, but you can't take it with you. If you want copies, it's 50 cents a page." "I'll want copies," Mae said. The file was thick, dozens of pages of official reports, typed on manual typewriters, the text slightly faded. Mae started with the summary report from the fire marshal. The language was technical but clear. Mechanical failure of the primary braking system, insufficient backup safety measures, 3 fatalities resulting from equipment malfunction. The cause of the mechanical failure was listed as material fatigue and inadequate maintenance. Responsibility was attributed to insufficient safety protocols at the facility. No mention of the equipment being newly installed, no mention of custom modifications, no mention of Ezra Trulane. Mae moved to the witness statements. Workers who had been at the mill that day, describing the horror of the accident. Supervisors explaining the normal operation procedures. And then, buried near the back, a statement from Ezra. His testimony was detailed and technical. He explained that he had fabricated the braking system according to specifications provided by Harrison Voss. He had used high-grade materials, tested every component, and personally supervised the installation. He stated, clearly and firmly, that the system as he built it should not have failed under normal operating conditions. The investigator's note at the bottom of Ezra's statement was brief. Subject appears defensive, unable to provide documentation supporting claims of proper materials and testing. Recommendation: no criminal charges, but civil liability should be considered. Unable to provide documentation. Mae's hands tightened on the paper. Had Ezra lost the documentation, or had it been taken from him? She continued through the file, finding more pieces of the puzzle. A technical analysis that concluded the brake components were substandard quality, inconsistent with proper industrial specifications. A recommendation that Consolidated Timber Industries review its contractor selection process. A final report closing the investigation with no criminal charges filed. And nowhere, in all these pages, was there any mention of the specialized work Ezra had been doing, the government contracts, the precision machining that had made his reputation. He was treated as a local handyman who'd gotten in over his head. Mae made copies of everything, 93 pages at 50 cents each. She didn't care about the cost. This was Ezra's vindication, or at least the start of it. Back in the taxi, heading toward Bitterridge, Mae called the number Betsy had given her for the Patent Office's public records line. She explained what she was looking for: any patents filed by Ezra Trulane between 1950 and 1965. The clerk on the other end was efficient and professional. "I can email you the results within 3 business days. There will be a small fee for copying and processing." "That's fine," Mae said, giving her email address. "And ma'am, just so you know, if you're doing genealogy or estate research, you might also want to check for any patents that were filed and rejected or filed and later withdrawn. Sometimes those records get overlooked." "Thank you," Mae said. "That's very helpful." By the time she got back to Bitterridge, it was late afternoon. The workshop felt different now, not just a building full of old tools, but a repository of evidence, a testament to one man's fight for justice. Mae spread the copied documents across the workbench, arranging them chronologically. The story they told was clear enough. A skilled machinist does work for a powerful man. Something goes wrong, the machinist gets blamed, the powerful man escapes consequences. But there were gaps in the story. What had happened between the installation of the braking system and its catastrophic failure? Why did the technical analysis conclude the components were substandard when Ezra swore he'd used high-grade materials? And most importantly, what did Harrison Voss's 1961 patent have to do with any of this? A knock on the workshop door startled her. She looked up to find Tommy Rawls standing in the entrance, his expression uncertain. "Hope I'm not interrupting," he said. "Saw the lights on and thought I'd check if you needed any help." Mae hesitated, then made a decision. "Tommy, come in. I want to show you something." She led him to the covered crate and pulled back the canvas, revealing the twisted brake assembly underneath. Tommy's eyes widened. "Is that from the mill fire?" Mae confirmed. "My grandfather kept it all these years. He labeled every piece, documented every modification. Why would he keep it? Because he knew the truth. Because he was trying to prove what really happened." Mae met Tommy's eyes. "You said your great-uncle died in that fire." Tommy nodded slowly. "Lucas Rawls. He was my grandmother's brother. She never got over losing him. Neither did the family. Then maybe you'll understand why I need to do this." Mae gestured to the documents spread across the workbench. "I'm going to find out what really happened. I'm going to clear my grandfather's name." Tommy looked at the papers, at the brake assembly, at Mae. "What do you need me to do? Help me search. There has to be more evidence here somewhere. My grandfather documented everything. If he kept the failed equipment, he kept other things too. They worked together as the evening shadows lengthened, going through every drawer, every cabinet, every box in the workshop. Tommy proved to be methodical and careful, treating each discovery with respect. It was Tommy who found the false bottom in the main workbench. He'd been examining the structure of the bench itself, running his hands along the underside, when he noticed a section that sounded hollow when tapped. "Mae, come, look at this." She knelt beside him, pressing her fingers against the wood where he indicated. There was definitely a hollow space, and when she examined the edge more carefully, she found a small catch hidden in the joinery. The catch released with a soft click, and a panel dropped down, revealing a shallow compartment. Inside were blueprints, rolled and tied with string. Beside them, a sealed envelope. Mae's hands shook as she pulled everything out and carried it to the workbench. She untied the blueprints first, spreading them carefully under the light. They were technical drawings, precisely rendered, showing a complex braking system with multiple fail-safes and safety mechanisms. The level of detail was extraordinary, every component labeled, every measurement specified, every angle calculated. At the bottom right corner, in Ezra's precise hand, E. Trulane, December 1958. Confidential. These were the original designs, the plans Ezra had created before anything was built, and stamped across the top, in faded red ink, patent pending. Mae stared at the stamp, her mind making connections. Ezra had filed for a patent. These weren't just custom work for a client, these were his own innovations, his own ideas, which meant Harrison Voss's 1961 patent, the one approved in 1963, had been stolen. With trembling fingers, Mae picked up the envelope. It was addressed to her in Ezra's handwriting, dated 3 months before his death. She opened it carefully, unfolding the letter inside. The letter was written on lined notebook paper, Ezra's handwriting as steady and precise as ever, despite his age. Asterisk. My dear Mae, asterisk, asterisk. If you're reading this, then I've passed on, and you've come home to Bitterridge. I wasn't sure you would. You had every reason not to. I know your mother worked hard to separate you from this place and its troubles. But something tells me you're the one person who might finish what I couldn't. Asterisk, asterisk. I spent my whole life building things, fixing things, making things work the way they were supposed to. That's what a good machinist does. We take raw materials and shape them into something useful, something that serves a purpose. I was proud of that work. I still am. Asterisk, asterisk. But in 1958, I created something special, a braking system for industrial equipment that was safer, more reliable, better than anything else available at the time. I designed it for a government contract, worked on it for months, perfected every detail. I filed for a patent because I believed it was mine, my innovation, my contribution. Asterisk, asterisk. Harrison Voss was a partner on that government project. We worked together, trusted each other, or at least I thought we did. He saw my designs, understood their value, and he waited. Asterisk, asterisk. When the patent office delayed my application tied up in bureaucracy, they said Voss filed his own patent, changed a few details, used different terminology, but the core design was mine. By the time I realized what he'd done, it was too late. His patent was approved. Mine was rejected as derivative. Asterisk, asterisk. I confronted him, threatened to expose him. That's when things turned ugly. Asterisk, asterisk. The braking system he had installed at his mill, the one that failed and killed those 3 men, wasn't built to my specifications. He'd taken my design and cheapened it, used inferior components to save money. Then when it failed, he blamed me. Said I'd built it, said I'd cut corners. Asterisk, asterisk. I kept the evidence. Mae, the actual failed equipment, my original plans, the documentation showing what he'd done. I tried to fight it through official channels, lawyers, investigators, even wrote to the patent office. But Voss had money and influence. I had neither. Asterisk, asterisk. Eventually, everyone told me to let it go. Your grandmother, your mother, even Vernon, they all said I was destroying myself for nothing. Maybe they were right. I lost my business, my reputation, my family's respect, but I couldn't let go of the truth. Asterisk, asterisk. I'm asking you to do what I couldn't, clear the record. Not for me, though I won't lie and say that doesn't matter, but for those 3 men who died because Voss valued profit over safety, for their families who never got real justice, and for you, so you'll know that your grandfather wasn't what this town said he was. Asterisk, asterisk. The key I left you opens more than just the workshop door. It opens the truth, if you're brave enough to look for it. Asterisk, asterisk. I'm proud of you, Mae. I always have been, even when you were too far away to hear me say it. Your grandmother used to tell me that stubbornness ran in our blood. It's why we're good at what we do, but it's also why we struggle to bend when life asks us to. Maybe you got enough of your father's flexibility to balance it out. I hope so. Asterisk, asterisk. Finish what I couldn't, and then, if you want, Lock that door and walk away. You'll have earned it. Asterisk. Asterisk. With love, Ezra times Mae. Read the letter 3 times, tears blurring her vision by the end. The weight of what Ezra was asking, what he'd been carrying for 40 years, felt almost crushing. But underneath the weight was something else. Clarity. Purpose. Finally, a reason why she'd been pulled back to this place. Mae. Tommy's voice was gentle. You okay? She wiped her eyes and handed him the letter. Read this. While Tommy read, Mae returned to the blueprints, studying them with new understanding. These weren't just technical drawings, they were proof of innovation, of genius. Ezra had seen a problem and solved it elegantly, creating something that should have saved lives. Instead, it had been stolen, corrupted, and used to destroy him. Jesus, Tommy breathed, finishing the letter. He kept fighting all this time. For 40 years, Mae confirmed, and now he's asking me to finish it. Can you? Tommy looked uncertain. I mean, Harrison Voss is dead. The mill's been closed for decades. Who would you even— Voss's company still exists, Mae interrupted. Consolidated Timber Industries. And that patent, the stolen patent that's still active, still generating value for whoever owns it now. She pulled out her phone, doing a quick search. The company was inherited by Voss's son, who died in 2008. Now it's run by his grandson, Richard Voss. Tommy leaned over to look at her phone screen, which showed a corporate website for Consolidated Timber Industries. They're huge. Look at this, they've got operations in 6 states, revenue in the hundreds of millions. Built on my grandfather's stolen work, Mae said quietly. At least partially. She sat down on the stool by the workbench, suddenly exhausted. The scope of what Ezra was asking felt overwhelming. How did one person take on a major corporation? How did she prove theft that happened over 60 years ago? My grandmother used to talk about Uncle Lucas, Tommy said, breaking the silence. About how he was careful, how he followed every safety rule. She never understood why the equipment failed when he was doing everything right. He looked at Mae. If what your grandfather says is true, it wasn't Lucas's fault. He couldn't have prevented it because the equipment was defective from the start. It wasn't his fault, Mae confirmed, and it wasn't Ezra's fault. It was Voss's fault, for stealing the design and then cheapening it to save money. So, what do we do? Mae looked around the workshop at the tools, the documents, the evidence Ezra had carefully preserved. We build a case. We find every piece of evidence that proves Ezra's designs were stolen, and then we make it public. Will that be enough? I don't know, but it's what Ezra asked me to do. They worked until well after dark, creating a systematic catalogue of everything they'd found. The original blueprints went in one pile. The investigation reports in another. The failed brake assembly was photographed from every angle. Tommy took notes while Mae organized, his handwriting surprisingly neat and careful. Around 9, they heard a car pull up outside. Mae tensed, but it was just Vernon, carrying 2 paper bags that smelled like Chinese food. Saw your lights on, he said, setting the bags on a clear section of workbench. Figured you might be hungry. Thank you, Mae said, realizing she'd skipped both lunch and dinner. Vernon, I need to show you something. She led him through everything they'd found. The ledger, the newspaper clippings, the investigation reports, the blueprints, and finally, Ezra's letter. Vernon read the letter slowly, his weathered face showing no expression. When he finished, he carefully folded it and handed it back to Mae. I knew most of this, he said quietly. Not all the details, but the general shape. Ezra tried to tell me years ago, but he paused, choosing his words carefully. I told him to let it go. I was young, scared about my own future. Voss employed half the people I knew. I didn't want to get caught in the crossfire. I'm not judging you, Mae said. Maybe you should. Vernon's voice was rough. I watched a good man get destroyed by lies, and I did nothing. Worse than nothing, I told him to stop fighting. I abandoned him when he needed allies. Vernon, let me finish. He held up a hand. I can't undo the past, but I can help now. I still have some of the notes I took when I worked with Ezra on that braking system. Technical details, material specifications, test results. I kept them because some part of me knew the truth mattered, even if I wasn't brave enough to speak it. Mae felt something tight in her chest, loosen slightly. Where are these notes? At my house. I'll bring them tomorrow. Vernon looked at the evidence spread across the workbench. What's your plan? I'm still figuring that out, but I know I need more than just Ezra's word against Voss's patent. I need to prove that Ezra's designs came first, that they were original innovations, and that Voss stole them. The patent office will have the filing dates, Tommy offered. They will, Mae agreed, but filing dates alone might not be enough. Voss could claim parallel development or that he built on Ezra's ideas legally. I need something more definitive. Vernon was quiet for a moment, then said, Ezra used to work with a lawyer in Portland, Samuel Morrison. He's old now, probably in his 80s, but he might remember the case. He might still have files. That's a good lead. Mae pulled out her phone and made a note. I'll try to track him down. They ate the Chinese food while discussing strategy. Vernon knew the technical side, which documents would prove Ezra's expertise, which specifications would show the design's sophistication. Tommy had a more practical perspective, thinking about how to present the story to modern audiences who might not care about old patent disputes. People care about injustice, Tommy said, spooning fried rice onto his plate. Especially when it's a small guy getting crushed by a big corporation. That's a story that resonates. But it's more than just business, Mae added. 3 men died. That makes it a human story too. And families were destroyed, Vernon said quietly. Not just the men who died, but their wives and children. And Ezra's family, your family, Mae. The ripples from what Voss did went far and wide. After they finished eating, Vernon headed home, promising to return in the morning with his notes. Tommy helped Mae clean up, then paused at the door. My grandmother's still alive, he said. She's 94, lives at the care home in Millbrook. If you wanted to talk to her about Uncle Lucas, about the fire, I think she'd appreciate knowing that someone's finally looking for the truth. I'd like that, Mae said. Thank you, Tommy, for everything. After he left, Mae sat alone in the workshop, surrounded by Ezra's life's work. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in harsh clarity. She thought about her grandfather, spending decades in this space, holding on to hope that someday the truth would matter. She thought about her mother, who had fled Bitterridge and never looked back, who had refused to speak about Ezra or his troubles. Mae had always resented that silence, but now she understood it better. Sometimes the weight of injustice was too heavy to carry. Sometimes the only way to survive was to pretend it didn't exist. But pretending hadn't made it go away. The truth had waited, patient and persistent, preserved in ledgers and blueprints and twisted metal. Mae pulled out her laptop and started drafting an email to the patent office, requesting detailed records of both Ezra's rejected application and Harrison Voss's approved patent. She needed to see them side by side to understand exactly how the designs compared. Then she searched for Samuel Morrison, attorney. Found him listed with a Portland law firm, though his status was of counsel, which usually meant retired but still affiliated. She drafted a careful email explaining who she was and what she was trying to do, asking if he'd be willing to speak with her about Ezra Trulane and the 1,960 seconds patent dispute. It was past midnight when she finally locked up the workshop and walked back to the motel. The streets of Bitterridge were completely dark, the mountains invisible against the night sky. Somewhere in those mountains, in houses scattered across the valley, were people who had known Ezra, who remembered the fire, who had their own versions of what happened. Mae wondered how many of them knew the truth. How many had suspected but stayed silent? How many had believed the lies, because believing was easier than fighting? In her motel room, she lay awake for a long time, Ezra's letter running through her mind. Asterisk. Finish what I couldn't. Asterisk. She would try. She owed him that much. But more than that, she owed it to the version of herself who had walked away at 27, who had let shame and confusion drive her from the only home she'd known. That version of Mae deserved to know that her grandfather had been worth staying for. Tomorrow, she thought, she'd start making calls. She'd track down Samuel Morrison, visit Tommy's grandmother, push the patent office for faster results. She'd take Ezra's carefully preserved evidence and turn it into a story that people couldn't ignore. Outside her window, Bitterridge slept, unaware that old secrets were stirring, that truths long buried were starting to surface. Mae closed her eyes, and for the first time since arriving in town, slept deeply. Mae woke to her phone, ringing. The bedside clock read 7:15 a.m. She fumbled for the phone, saw an unfamiliar Portland number. "Hello? Miss Trulane? This is Samuel Morrison. I received your email last night." Mae sat up, suddenly alert. "Mr. Morrison, thank you for calling so quickly. I'm an old man, Miss Trulane. I don't sleep much anymore." His voice was clear despite his age, carrying the measured cadence of someone used to choosing words carefully. "And I remember your grandfather well. When I saw your name, I knew I needed to speak with you." 1962, right after the mill fire. He believed his patent had been stolen, that Harrison Voss had filed a derivative application and gotten it approved while his own was still pending. He had evidence, blueprints, correspondence, technical documentation. "I've found some of that evidence," Mae said. "It's here in his workshop." "Good. That's very good." Morrison paused. "Miss Trulane, I'm going to be direct with you. I failed your grandfather. I was young, ambitious, and when Voss's lawyers came at us with everything they had, I folded. I advised Ezra to drop the case, to accept that he couldn't win against that kind of money and power. But you believed him." "I believed him completely." The technical analysis was clear. Ezra's design was original and sophisticated. Voss's patent was derivative, a simplified version that captured the commercial value while avoiding the most complex elements. It was theft, pure and simple. Mae's grip tightened on the phone. If it was that clear, why couldn't you prove it? Because patent law is complicated, and Voss had documentation showing his own development process. Nothing proved beyond doubt that he'd stolen from Ezra rather than arriving at similar conclusions independently. Add in the mill fire, the deaths, the investigation that painted Ezra as incompetent, it created enough doubt to make the case unprovable. What would you need to prove it now? Morrison was quiet for a moment. "If I were building this case today, I'd need 3 things. First, definitive proof that Ezra's designs predated Voss's filing. Not just his word, but dated documentation that establishes a clear timeline. Second, evidence of Voss's access to Ezra's work, something showing he saw the designs before filing his own patent. And third, technical analysis comparing the 2 patents that demonstrates Voss's version is derivative of Ezra's original innovation." "I have the original blueprints," Mae said. "Dated December 1958, Voss's patent wasn't filed until 1961. That's a start, but you need more. You need proof that Voss saw those blueprints, or correspondence showing collaboration, or testimony from someone who witnessed the theft. Vernon Keppel was Ezra's apprentice. He has notes from when they developed the system. That helps establish the timeline. But Vernon's testimony alone might not be enough. He's closely connected to Ezra, could be seen as biased." Morrison's voice gentled. "Miss Trulane, I'm not trying to discourage you. I'm trying to prepare you for how difficult this will be. Voss is dead. Most of the principles are dead. You're fighting history, and history has a way of protecting the powerful. What if I could find Voss's own records?" Mae asked. Documentation from his company showing he used Ezra's designs? That would change everything. But how would you access those records? I'm working on that, Mae said, though she had no idea how she'd actually accomplish it. After the call ended, Mae dressed quickly and headed to the workshop. Vernon was already there, a cardboard box sitting on the workbench. "My notes," he said, gesturing to the box. "Everything I kept from working with Ezra in the 50s and 60s. Mae opened the box carefully. Inside were spiral notebooks filled with technical drawings, calculations, material specifications. Vernon's younger handwriting covered page after page, documenting the development of various projects. This one. Vernon pulled out a particular notebook. "This is from the braking system project. See here, these are the early concept sketches, before Ezra finalized the design. And here," he flipped forward, "these are the material test results. We spent weeks testing different alloys, different configurations." Mae photographed each page, her phone's camera capturing the careful documentation. "This is exactly what Morrison said we needed. Proof that the design process was thorough and methodical. There's more." Vernon pulled out a separate folder. "These are receipts for materials we ordered for the government contract. High-grade steel, precision components, expensive stuff. Nothing like what was actually used in the mill equipment that failed." Mae studied the receipts, noting the dates and specifications. "So when the failed equipment was analyzed and found to be substandard, it wasn't what Ezra built," Vernon finished. "Voss must have substituted cheaper components after the fact, either to save money or to make Ezra's design fail." The door opened, and Tommy entered, carrying coffee and pastries from the diner. "Thought you might need breakfast. You're a lifesaver," Mae said, accepting a cup gratefully. "I talked to my grandmother last night," Tommy said. "Told her what you're doing. She wants to meet you. Says she has things to tell you about Uncle Lucas and the fire. When can we go?" "Whenever you want. I can drive us to Millbrook." Mae looked at the evidence spread across the workbench: blueprints, notes, receipts, letters. They were building a story piece by piece, but she needed more. She needed to understand not just the technical theft, but the human cost. "Let's go this afternoon," she said. "This morning, I want to visit the county records office again. There's something I need to check." The county records office was less crowded on a Thursday morning. Phyllis recognized Mae and nodded in greeting. "Back again? Find what you needed last time?" "I did, thank you. Today I'm looking for property records. Specifically, I want to see the ownership history of Consolidated Timber Industries and any properties associated with Harrison Voss." Phyllis raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. "That'll be in the property and deed records. Give me a few minutes." While she waited, Mae used her phone to search for more information about Consolidated Timber Industries. The company's website was professional and modern, emphasizing sustainability and community partnership. Richard Voss's biography described him as a third-generation timber industry leader committed to innovation and safety. The irony wasn't lost on Mae. Safety. Built on a stolen safety innovation that had killed 3 men when it was cheapened and corrupted, Phyllis returned with several folders. "Here's what we have." The mill property was sold in 1998 when Consolidated moved their operations to a larger facility in Washington. The original company headquarters is still standing, though it's been empty for years. Ownership transferred from Harrison Voss to his son Thomas in 1990, then to Richard Voss in 2008. Mae flipped through the property records, looking for anything useful. Then she found a map of the old headquarters building, filed with the original deed in 1947. The building layout showed offices, a warehouse, and notably, a basement vault for secure document storage. "Is this building still accessible?" Mae asked. "Technically, it's still owned by Consolidated, but like I said, it's been empty for years. The town's been after them to either renovate it or tear it down, but nothing's happened yet." Phyllis studied Mae with curiosity. "Why? What are you looking for?" Mae chose her words carefully. My grandfather did work for Harrison Voss. I'm trying to understand the history of their business relationship. Well, if you're planning to go poking around that old building, be careful. It's not maintained, could be structurally unsound. Mae made copies of the property records and maps, then met Tommy back at the workshop. Vernon had left to handle business at his store, promising to return later. "Change of plans," Mae said. "Before we visit your grandmother, I want to see the old, consolidated headquarters." Tommy looked uncertain. "That place has been locked up for years. We can't just break in." "We're not breaking in. We're investigating, looking for public information about a company's business practices." "That sounds like something that could get us arrested." "Probably," Mae admitted. "But think about it, Tommy. If Voss kept records of his dealings with Ezra, if there's documentation of the patent theft, it would be in that building, in that basement vault." Tommy was quiet for a long moment. "My grandmother waited 60 years for answers about why Uncle Lucas died. If there's a chance we can find them, then we have to try," Mae finished. The old Consolidated Timber Industries headquarters sat on the outskirts of town, a 3-story brick building slowly being reclaimed by blackberry vines and moss. Windows on the upper floors were broken, and the parking lot was cracked and weedy. They parked Tommy's truck a block away and approached on foot. The front entrance was chained and padlocked, but as they circled the building, they found a basement window that had been broken out, probably by teenagers looking for a place to party. "This feels like a bad idea," Tommy muttered. "Probably is," Mae agreed, but she was already lowering herself through the window. Inside, the basement was dark and musty, lit only by the dim light filtering through dirty windows. Mae pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam revealed a long corridor lined with file cabinets and storage boxes. "The vault should be toward the back," Mae said, consulting the map she'd photographed. They moved carefully through the darkness, their footsteps echoing on concrete. The building creaked and settled around them, making Mae's heart race with equal parts fear and anticipation. The vault door was at the end of the corridor, a heavy steel thing with a combination lock. Mae's hopes sank. There was no way they were getting through that. But when Tommy pulled on the handle, the door swung open. "Someone's been here," he said, shining his own phone light inside. "Recently, judging by the dust patterns." The vault was larger than Mae expected, lined with metal shelves holding boxes and file cabinets. Everything was labeled with dates and categories, financial records, personnel files, contracts, legal documents. Mae went straight to the section marked Patents and Intellectual Property, 1,950 to 1,970. There were 4 boxes. She pulled down the first one and opened it carefully. Inside were file folders organized by year. She found 1961 and pulled out a thick folder labeled Brake System Patent Application. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was everything correspondence with the patent office, technical drawings that were clearly based on Ezra's original blueprints, development notes that referenced specifications provided by Mae Trulane, and most damning of all, a memo from Harrison Voss to his company's patent attorney. Mae read the memo twice to make sure she understood it correctly. Asterisk. "Per our discussion, I've modified the brake design sufficiently to file under our own patent. Trulane's application is still pending, but our attorney assures me the changes are enough to claim independent development. Proceed with filing immediately. Once approved, we can implement the design at all facilities, recouping development costs within 2 years. Asterisk. It was dated March 1961, 6 months before Voss filed his patent application. Proof of deliberate theft. Mae, Tommy's voice was urgent. Someone's upstairs. We need to go. Mae heard it too, footsteps, heavy and deliberate, moving through the floor above them. She grabbed the entire folder, stuffed it inside her jacket, and followed Tommy back toward the basement window. They were halfway there when a flashlight beam caught them. "Stop right there." The voice was male, authoritative. This is private property. You're trespassing. Mae turned slowly, raising her hands. A security guard stood at the far end of the corridor, one hand on his radio. "We're leaving," Mae said. "We didn't mean any harm. Too late for that. I'm calling the sheriff." The sheriff's deputy, who responded, was young, probably not much older than Tommy. His name tag read Martinez, and he looked uncomfortable with the whole situation. "Let me get this straight," he said, standing in the basement corridor with his arms crossed. "You broke into an abandoned building to what, exactly?" "Research," Mae said. "I'm investigating a historical patent dispute involving my grandfather by breaking into private property." "The window was already broken," Tommy offered weakly. Martinez sighed. "That's still trespassing. You know that, right?" He looked at the file folder Mae was still clutching. "What's in there?" Mae made a split-second decision. "Evidence of intellectual property theft. My grandfather's designs were stolen by the owner of this building in the 1960 seconds. This file proves it." The security guard, a heavy-set man in his 50s, stepped forward. "That's company property. You can't just take it. It's evidence of a crime," Mae countered, "and it's been sitting in an abandoned building for decades. Nobody's cared about it until now." Martinez held up a hand. "Okay, everyone calm down. Miss Trulane, I'm going to need you to return the file. Then we'll discuss what happens next. I'll return it after I make copies," Mae said firmly. "Every page." "That's not how this works, Deputy Martinez." A new voice cut through the tension. Mae turned to see Vernon Keppel descending the basement stairs. "Sorry I'm late. I tried calling, but you must not have had reception down here." Mae stared at him in confusion. Vernon addressed the deputy with easy familiarity. "I'm Vernon Keppel. I own the hardware store on Main Street, served on the town council for 15 years. Miss Trulane is my associate. We're conducting an authorized investigation into historical records related to Ezra Trulane's business dealings with Consolidated Timber Industries." "Authorized? By who?" the security guard demanded. "By the estate of Ezra Trulane, which Miss Trulane represents as his heir." Vernon pulled a folded paper from his pocket. Mae recognized it as the property deed from the workshop. "Mr. Trulane had a business relationship with Consolidated, spanning 2 decades. The records in this building pertain directly to that relationship and therefore fall under the scope of legitimate historical research. It was complete nonsense, legally speaking, but Vernon delivered it with such confidence that Martinez looked uncertain. "The building's been abandoned for years," Vernon continued. "No active security, no trespassing signs posted at the point of entry Miss Trulane used. And frankly, the company should be thanking her for identifying potential liability issues with building security." Martinez looked between Vernon, Mae, and the security guard. Finally, he said, "Here's what's going to happen. Miss Trulane, you're going to return that file. Mr." He looked at the guard. "Harrison. Bill Harrison. Mr. Harrison, you're going to let me photograph the contents of that file for the record. Then everyone is going to leave this building and not come back. Are we clear?" It wasn't ideal, but it was better than being arrested. Mae handed over the file folder, and Martinez used his phone to photograph each page. When he was done, he returned the file to its box in the vault. "Now, all of you, out. Miss Trulane, Mr. Rawls, consider this a warning. Next time, it'll be charges." Outside, standing by Tommy's truck, Mae turned to Vernon. "How did you know we were here?" "Tommy's grandmother called me. Said Tommy mentioned something about checking out the old Consolidated building, and she was worried you kids would get yourselves in trouble." Vernon smiled slightly. "She was right." "Thank you for coming," Mae said. "That could have gone very badly. It still might. Bill Harrison works for a security company contracted by Consolidated. He's going to report this to his superiors, who will report it to Richard Voss." Vernon's expression grew serious. You've just announced to Voss that someone's digging into his grandfather's business practices. He's going to want to know why. Mae thought about the photographs Martinez had taken, now stored on his phone. Evidence, but not in her possession. We need to get those photos from the deputy. Leave that to me, Vernon said. Martinez is a good kid. His father worked at my store for 20 years. I'll talk to him, explain what's really going on. He'll understand. Tommy drove Mae back to the workshop, both of them quiet. Mae's hands still trembled with adrenaline, her mind racing through what they'd found and what it meant. Inside the workshop, she pulled out her laptop and started drafting a timeline, organizing everything they'd discovered. 1,958. Ezra creates innovative brake system design for government contract. Files for patent 1,961. Harrison Voss files his own patent application using modified version of Ezra's design. 1,962. Millfire kills 3 workers due to failed brake system built with substandard components. 1,963. Voss's patent approved. Ezra's rejected as derivative. The patent was clear. But patent wasn't proof, not in a legal sense. She needed the memo she'd seen in that vault, the one where Voss explicitly acknowledged using Ezra's specifications. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed a Portland area code. Miss Trulane? This is Lauren Hastings. I'm an intellectual property attorney. Samuel Morrison called me this morning, asked if I'd be willing to consult on a historical patent case. He mentioned you're investigating a theft that occurred in the 1,960 seconds. Mae's spirits lifted. Yes. My grandfather's brake system design was stolen by Harrison Voss of Consolidated Timber Industries. Sam gave me the basics. I've looked into it, and I think you might have a case. Hastings spoke quickly, efficiently. Not a criminal case. Too much time has passed. But potentially a civil case for unjust enrichment and restitution. If you can prove Voss built his fortune on stolen innovations, his heirs could be liable for damages. What would I need to prove that? Dated documentation showing your grandfather's original designs, evidence of Voss's access to those designs, proof that Voss's patent is derivative, and ideally some acknowledgement from Voss himself that he used your grandfather's work without permission or compensation. I found that last one, Mae said. A memo from Voss to his attorney, dated 1,961, explicitly stating he'd modified Ezra's design and planned to file under his own patent. Hastings was quiet for a moment. That's exactly what we need. Where is this memo now? Mae explained about the vault, the security guard, the photographs on Deputy Martinez's phone. Okay, that's not ideal, but it's workable. Can you get copies of those photographs? I think so. A friend is working on it. Good. Send them to me as soon as you have them. In the meantime, I need you to gather everything else, the original blueprints, your grandfather's patent application, Vernon Keppel's notes, any correspondence between Ezra and Voss. I'll need to review it all before I can tell you definitively whether we have a case. After the call ended, Mae felt a surge of hope. For the first time since arriving in Bitterridge, the path forward seemed almost clear. Tommy appeared in the doorway. Vernon just called. Martinez is bringing over the photos from his phone. He wants to hear the whole story. An hour later, Deputy Martinez sat at the workshop workbench, looking at the evidence Mae had spread out before him. Vernon stood nearby, having provided the introduction and explanation. So, your grandfather built this brake system, Martinez said, studying the blueprints, and Voss stole the design, patented it as his own, then blamed your grandfather when the cheapened version failed and killed 3 workers. That's what the evidence suggests, Mae said. Martinez looked at the photographs on his phone, the images he'd taken of the memo, and files from Voss's vault. This is pretty damning. Voss admits in writing that he took your grandfather's specifications. Can you send me those photos? Mae asked. Martinez hesitated. Technically, I took them as part of an investigation into possible trespassing. But now you know why we were there, Vernon said gently, and you know the truth matters. The deputy was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, and looked at Mae. "What's your email?" Mae gave it to him, trying to keep her expression neutral. A few seconds later, her phone chimed with an incoming message. "Those photos were taken in the course of documenting the contents of a potentially compromised historical record," Martinez said formally. "I'm sharing them with the legal heir to Ezra Trulane's estate for preservation purposes." He stood up. "And Miss Trulane, whatever you're planning to do with this evidence, do it right. My grandfather worked at that mill. He was there, the day those men died. He's wondered his whole life what really happened." After Martinez left, Mae, Vernon, and Tommy sat in silence for a moment. "We have it," Mae finally said. "Everything we need to prove Ezra was telling the truth." "Now what?" Tommy asked. "Now we take it public," Mae said. "We contact the media, file a civil suit, make enough noise that Consolidated can't ignore it." Vernon looked uncertain. "Richard Voss isn't going to take this lying down. He's got resources, lawyers, money. He'll fight back." "Let him," Mae said, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. "I'm not my grandfather. I'm not alone, and I'm not going to spend 40 years gathering evidence in silence. We tell the story now, and we tell it loud." She opened her laptop and started drafting an email to Lauren Hastings, attaching the photos from Martinez, the scans of Ezra's blueprints, and Vernon's notes. She explained everything they'd found, everything they could prove. While she worked, Tommy took photos of the physical evidence for backup. Vernon organized the documents into a coherent narrative sequence, his machinist's precision serving him well. By early evening, they had assembled a comprehensive package: physical evidence, digital copies, expert testimony, historical documentation, everything needed to tell Ezra's story. Mae sent the package to Lauren Hastings, then sat back, exhausted but satisfied. Her phone rang almost immediately. It was Hastings. "I've reviewed the materials you sent," the attorney said without preamble. "Miss Trulane, this is one of the clearest cases of intellectual property theft I've seen. The memo alone is devastating. But there's something you need to know." Mae's stomach tightened. "What?" "Cases like this, when we're going after the heirs of the actual wrongdoer, can get complicated. Richard Voss didn't steal your grandfather's work, his grandfather did. We're asking him to pay for sins he didn't commit. But he's profited from those sins," Mae argued. "He's built his wealth on stolen innovations." "I agree, and I think we can make that case. But it means Voss will fight hard because he'll see himself as the victim of inherited guilt. He'll argue that he didn't know about his grandfather's theft, that he's built on what he believed was a legitimate foundation." "Then we prove he did know," Mae said. "Or that he should have known. Those files were in his company's vault. If he ever looked at them—" "We can't prove he did," Hastings interrupted gently. "But we can prove the company benefited from stolen work, and we can ask for restitution not as punishment, but as justice." Mae took a breath, centering herself. "What's our next step?" "I'm going to draft a letter to Consolidated's legal counsel. We'll lay out the evidence, explain what we're prepared to prove, and offer them a chance to settle before this becomes public. If they're smart, they'll recognize the PR nightmare and come to the table. And if they don't, then we file suit and take it to court. It'll be expensive, time-consuming, and exhausting. But Miss Trulane, I think we can win." After the call ended, Mae walked to the covered crate in the corner, the one holding the failed brake assembly. She pulled back the canvas and looked at the twisted metal, thinking about the 3 men who had died because of greed and theft. Lucas Rawls, Tommy's great-uncle, James Mitchell and Robert Graves, the other 2 victims, men with families, with futures, with lives cut short by equipment that should have been safe but wasn't. Ezra had fought for them, had preserved the evidence, sought justice, refused to let their deaths be reduced to accident and equipment failure. Now, it was Mae's turn to finish that fight. She recovered the crate and turned to find Tommy watching her. "Tomorrow," she said, "I'd like to visit your grandmother. I want to tell her what we're doing. She deserves to know that someone finally cares about the truth." Tommy nodded, his expression somber. "She'll want to hear it from you directly." Vernon rejoined them after locking up his store for the day. Together, the three of them sat in the workshop as the light faded outside, planning their next moves. They would need to prepare for Voss's response. They would need to protect the evidence they'd gathered. And they would need to be ready for the possibility that this would get ugly before it got better. But for the first time since Mae had arrived in Bitterridge, she felt like she wasn't just cleaning out an old building or sorting through a dead man's possessions. She was doing something that mattered, something that honored both the living and the dead. Ezra's workshop had held more than just tools and dust. It had held the truth, carefully preserved and patiently waiting. Now that truth was finally ready to come into the light. The Millbrook Care Home was a low brick building surrounded by well-maintained gardens. Tommy led Mae through the lobby to a sunlit common room where residents sat reading, playing cards, or watching television. Emma Rawls occupied a chair by the window, a blanket over her lap despite the warmth. She was small and frail, her face deeply lined, but her eyes were sharp and clear as they fixed on Mae. "So you're Ezra's granddaughter," she said without preamble. "You look like him around the eyes." Mae sat in the chair beside her. "Thank you for agreeing to see me, Mrs. Rawls. Call me Emma, and I'm the one who should be thanking you." She reached out and gripped Mae's hand with surprising strength. "Tommy told me what you're doing, that you're finally looking into what happened to my brother." "I am," Mae confirmed. "I want to understand the truth about the mill fire, about the equipment that failed." Emma's expression darkened. "The equipment that murdered him, you mean?" "That's what it was, honey. Murder, plain and simple. They put Lucas in front of a machine they knew wasn't safe, and when it killed him, they called it an accident. Harrison Voss," Mae said carefully. "Harrison Voss, and everyone who helped him cover it up." Emma's voice shook with old anger. "The investigators, the insurance company, the newspaper, they all made it seem like just bad luck, like sometimes equipment fails and men die. But Lucas knew something was wrong with that saw. He'd complained about it for weeks, said the brake wasn't responding right." Mae leaned forward. "He complained? Before the accident?" "To his supervisor, to the foreman, to anyone who'd listen. Said the brake felt loose, that the timing was off. But they told him he was imagining things, that the equipment was brand new and state-of-the-art." Emma's eyes filled with tears. 3 weeks later, he was dead. Mae felt cold. "Did he document these complaints? Write them down anywhere?" "I don't know. After he died, his supervisor cleaned out his locker before the family could get there. Said it was standard procedure. We never saw any of his personal effects from work." Tommy, who had been standing quietly by the window, spoke up. "Did Great-Uncle Lucas ever mention who installed the brake system?" Emma nodded. "He said it was new equipment, just installed the month before. Custom work, supposedly top of the line. He even said the machinist, your grandfather, Mae, had come personally to check it after installation, said it was working perfectly." She looked at Mae. "That's why I never blamed Ezra, even when everyone else did. Lucas trusted him. If Ezra said it was safe, Lucas believed him." "It was safe," Mae said quietly, "when Ezra built it. But someone changed it after he installed it, substituted cheaper parts to save money." Emma closed her eyes. "All these years, I wondered. Everyone said it was Ezra's fault, said he'd cut corners. But it never made sense. Lucas said Ezra was meticulous, careful, that he double-checked everything. He was," Vernon said, entering the room. He'd followed them to Millbrook, but waited in the lobby to give Mae time with Emma first. I worked with Ezra on that brake system. Every component was tested, every specification met. What failed in that mill wasn't what we built. Emma looked at Vernon with recognition. I remember you. You were just a boy then. I was, Vernon agreed, and I've carried the guilt of staying silent for 60 years. I'm sorry, Emma. I should have spoken up when it mattered. You're speaking up now, Emma said. That's what counts. She turned back to Mae. What do you need from me? Your testimony, Mae said. If this goes to court, I need you to tell them what Lucas said about the equipment complaints. It establishes that there were problems with the brake system before the accident, that Voss knew or should have known about the issues. I'll testify, Emma said without hesitation. I'm 94 years old. I've got nothing left to lose and everything to gain if the truth finally comes out. They talked for another hour, Emma providing details about the aftermath of the fire, the investigation, the way the community had fractured over the question of blame. Some people defended Ezra, she said, but they were drowned out by those who wanted a simple answer to a complicated tragedy. As they were preparing to leave, Emma gripped Mae's hand again. Honey, be careful. People with money and power don't like being challenged. Voss has both. So did his grandfather, Mae said, but the truth is stronger than either. Back in Bitterridge, Mae found a message from Lauren Hastings. The attorney had sent her letter to Consolidated's legal counsel that morning. Now they waited for a response. While they waited, Mae continued organizing the evidence, creating a comprehensive narrative that could be understood by journalists, lawyers, and ultimately, the public. She drafted a press release, wrote an outline of Ezra's story, and compiled photographs of the key documents. 3 days later, Hastings called. They've responded, she said, her tone carefully neutral. Richard Voss wants to meet. In person. Mae's heart raced. When? Tomorrow, if you're available. He's flying into Portland, suggested we meet at my office. Hastings paused. Mae, this could go either way. He might be preparing to settle, or he might be planning to intimidate us into dropping the case. I'm not dropping anything, Mae said firmly. Good, because neither am I. The drive to Portland took 6 hours. Mae made it in 5.5, her mind spinning with possibilities. She'd imagined Richard Voss as a faceless corporate villain, but now she was going to meet him in person, see the man who'd inherited his grandfather's empire. Lauren Hastings' office was in a sleek downtown building, all glass and steel. The attorney herself was younger than Mae expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and an efficient manner. Before they arrive, Hastings said, I need you to understand something. Our leverage in this case comes from 2 sources, the strength of our evidence and the threat of public exposure. Voss knows that even if we lose in court, the PR damage could be significant. That gives us negotiating power. What are you saying? I'm saying he might offer a settlement. Money. Public acknowledgement. Maybe both. You'll need to decide what you're willing to accept. Mae thought about Ezra, spending 40 years seeking justice. I want the truth acknowledged. Publicly. I want his name cleared and his innovations credited. The money matters less than that. Good, because the money, if we get any, won't be as much as you might think. We're not going to bankrupt Consolidated, but we can force them to acknowledge history and make restitution. At precisely 2 o'clock, the receptionist announced their visitors. Richard Voss entered with 2 lawyers, both carrying briefcases. Voss was younger than Mae expected, maybe in his late 40s, well dressed in an expensive suit, his expression carefully controlled. He extended his hand to Hastings first, then to Mae. Miss Trulane, I appreciate you agreeing to this meeting. Up close, Mae could see the resemblance to his grandfather in the archived photograph. Same sharp features, same assessing eyes. But where Harrison Voss had looked confident and almost smug, Richard Voss looked troubled. They sat around a conference table, lawyers on either side, Mae and Voss facing each other. I'll be direct, Voss began. I've reviewed the materials your attorney sent. The The memo from my grandfather, the patent comparisons, all of it. If what you're alleging is true, it represents a serious failure of ethics on my grandfather's part. It is true, Mae said. Every word. So you say. But I have a problem. I've built my career on the assumption that my family's business was founded on legitimate innovation, that my grandfather was a visionary industrialist who created jobs and drove progress. What you're asking me to do is acknowledge that he was a thief and possibly a murderer. I'm asking you to acknowledge facts, Mae said quietly. 3 men died because your grandfather stole my grandfather's designs and cheapened them to save money. That's not an allegation. That's what happened. One of Voss's lawyers, a woman with silver hair, spoke up. Miss Trulane, even if we accept your version of events, which we don't, you must understand that my client cannot be held responsible for actions taken decades before he was born. He's profited from those actions, Hastings countered. His entire business empire is built on innovations stolen from Ezra Trulane. That creates legal liability regardless of his personal involvement. Or, the lawyer said coolly, it creates a tragic historical footnote that has no bearing on modern operations. The second lawyer, a younger man, opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. We've done our own investigation, Miss Trulane. Your grandfather's business was failing in the early 60s. He was facing bankruptcy, struggling to compete with larger firms. It's possible his accusations against Harrison Voss were motivated by financial desperation rather than actual theft. Mae felt anger rising hot in her chest. My grandfather kept the failed brake assembly for 40 years. He documented everything, preserved evidence, fought for justice when everyone else wanted him to stay silent. That's not the behavior of someone lying about theft, or, the lawyer said, it's the behavior of someone who became obsessive and paranoid after a business failure. Mae started to stand, ready to walk out, but Voss held up a hand. Enough, he said, silencing his lawyers. He looked at Mae directly. I want to show you something. He reached into his own briefcase and pulled out a leather-bound journal. After your attorney's letter arrived, I did what you did. I went looking through old records, trying to understand what really happened. My grandfather kept personal journals. I found them in storage at the family estate. He opened the journal to a marked page and slid it across the table to Mae. The entry was dated July 1962, 4 months after the mill fire. Harrison Voss's handwriting was harder to read than Ezra's, more rushed and angular, but the words were clear. Asterisk. The fire continues to haunt me. 3 men dead, families destroyed. The investigation cleared us officially, but I know the truth. The modified brake system was inadequate. I authorized the cost reductions, believed we could maintain safety while improving profit margins. I was wrong. Asterisk. Trulane has been making accusations, claims I stole his patent and then sabotaged the equipment. The theft part is true, though I'll never admit it publicly. His design was brilliant, and I saw an opportunity to claim it as my own. But the sabotage, that was never intentional. I simply didn't understand the critical nature of his specifications. I thought they were overcomplicated, that simpler components would suffice. Asterisk. I was wrong, and men died because of it. Asterisk. But I can't acknowledge this publicly. Too much is at stake, the company, my family, the hundreds of workers who depend on us. I've arranged for the families of the deceased to receive generous settlements, far more than required by law. It's inadequate, I know, but it's all I can offer. Asterisk. Trulane will keep fighting. He's that kind of man, principled, stubborn, unable to let injustice stand. Part of me respects that. But I have to protect what I've built, even if it means destroying his reputation in the process. Asterisk. God forgive me. Asterisk. The conference room was silent. Mae read the entry 3 times, her hands shaking. My grandfather was a thief, Voss said quietly. And because of his theft and arrogance, 3 men died. I've spent the last week reading through his journals, understanding exactly what he did, and I've realized something. I've built my entire life on a lie." His lawyers looked uncomfortable, clearly unhappy with this direction. "Richard," the silver-haired lawyer said, "I strongly advise against. I'm done taking advice that prioritizes corporate interests over human decency," Voss interrupted. He looked at Mae. "Your grandfather deserved better, those 3 men who died deserved better, and you deserve the truth, publicly acknowledged." Mae felt tears burning behind her eyes. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I have a daughter," Voss said. "She's 12 years old, and I don't want her to grow up learning that her father knew the truth and chose money over integrity." He took a breath. "Here's what I'm proposing. Full public acknowledgement of the patent theft and my grandfather's role in the mill fire. A formal apology to your grandfather's estate and the families of the victims. And a substantial financial settlement, not as payment for silence, but as restitution for stolen innovations that built my family's fortune." "How substantial?" Hastings asked, her attorney instincts kicking in. $2.3 million, to be split as Miss Trulane sees fit between herself and the families of Lucas Rawls, James Mitchell, and Robert Graves. Mae couldn't speak. The number was staggering, far more than she'd imagined. "Additionally," Voss continued, "I'm proposing the establishment of the Ezra Trulane Innovation Fund, managed by Consolidated but independent in its operations. Its purpose will be to support small inventors and machinists, to ensure that what happened to your grandfather doesn't happen to others." "Richard," the male lawyer said urgently, "this exposes the company to the consequences of my grandfather's actions," Voss finished, "which we should have faced 60 years ago." He looked at his lawyers. "I'm not discussing this further. It's done." The lawyers exchanged glances, clearly furious, but unable to override their client. Hastings looked at Mae. "What do you think?" Mae thought about Ezra, working alone in his workshop for decades, fighting for recognition that never came. About Emma Rawls, carrying grief for 60 years. About Vernon, bearing the weight of silence. "I want one more thing," Mae said. "A permanent memorial for the 3 men who died. Not just their names on a plaque, but the truth about why they died, about the equipment failure that killed them and the theft that made it possible." Voss nodded without hesitation. "Done. We'll work with the families to design something appropriate." "Then, yes," Mae said, "we have a deal." The lawyers spent the next 2 hours drafting the agreement, spelling out every detail. Mae would receive $2.3 million, with the understanding that she would distribute a portion to the victims' families. Consolidated would issue a public statement acknowledging Harrison Voss's theft of Ezra Trulane's patent and his role in creating the conditions that led to the mill fire. The Ezra Trulane Innovation Fund would be established with an initial endowment of $5 million, and the memorial would be built within 6 months. As they were preparing to sign, Voss spoke directly to Mae one more time. "I can't undo what my grandfather did, but I can acknowledge it, learn from it, and try to make whatever small amends are possible. I'm sorry for what your family went through. I'm sorry your grandfather died without vindication, and I'm grateful that you fought for the truth when it would have been easier to walk away." Mae signed the agreement, her hand steady despite the surreal nature of the moment. This morning, she'd been preparing for a fight. Now she'd won without ever going to court. "There's one thing I don't understand," she said to Voss. "Your lawyers clearly didn't want you to do this. You could have fought us, made this difficult. Why didn't you?" Voss was quiet for a moment. "Because I read my grandfather's journals. I saw how the guilt ate at him, how he died knowing he'd built his success on theft and death. And I decided I didn't want to live that way. Some things matter more than money or corporate reputation." He smiled slightly. "Your grandfather understood that. Maybe I inherited a little of his integrity along with my grandfather's company." Outside Hastings's office, standing on the Portland street as evening fell, Mae called Vernon. "We settled," she said simply. Settled? Vernon's voice rose in surprise. What does that mean? It means Voss acknowledged everything. The theft, the fire, all of it. We got money, a public apology, and a memorial fund. Vernon, we won. There was silence on the other end, then a sound that might have been crying. Ezra would be proud. Vernon finally managed. After all these years, someone finally listened. Mae called Tommy next, telling him the news, asking him to inform Emma. Then she called Emma directly, wanting the older woman to hear it from her personally. They admitted it? Emma's voice shook. After all this time, they admitted Lucas wasn't to blame. He wasn't to blame, Mae confirmed. And everyone will know that now. There's going to be a memorial, Emma. One that tells the truth about what happened. Emma wept, and Mae let her, understanding that these were tears of relief and vindication that had been 60 years in the making. That night, Mae sat in a Portland hotel room, still processing everything that had happened. She pulled out her phone and looked at the photograph of Ezra she'd found in the workshop. A young man, proud and skilled, standing beside machinery he'd helped create. We did it, she whispered to the photograph. We finished what you started. Her phone chimed with an email from Hastings. The wire transfer would go through in 3 business days. The public announcement would be made simultaneously, and Consolidated's PR team was already coordinating with journalists to ensure the story was told accurately. Mae thought about what she would do with the money. Half would go to the families of the 3 men who died, Tommy's family, and the descendants of James Mitchell and Robert Graves. The rest, well, she'd figure that out. Maybe invest in the workshop, turn it into something that honored Ezra's legacy. Maybe establish a scholarship for young people interested in traditional crafts and trades. But first, she needed to go home to Bitterridge and tell the town what had happened. Tell them that Ezra Trulane had been vindicated, that the truth had finally emerged from decades of silence. As she drifted off to sleep, Mae thought about the journey that had brought her here. A key, a note, a workshop full of secrets. And underneath it all, one man's stubborn belief that truth mattered, that justice was worth fighting for, even when everyone else had moved on. Ezra had been right. And now, finally, the world knew it. Mae returned to Bitterridge the next morning, but the town felt different now, or maybe she was the one who had changed. She'd left as someone sorting through an inheritance, and she was returning as someone who had rewritten history. Vernon met her at the workshop, Tommy arriving shortly after. Mae told them everything, the meeting with Voss, the journal entries, the settlement terms. When she finished, Vernon sat down heavily on his stool, looking older than his years. 2.3 million, he said quietly, and a public acknowledgement. The money matters less than the acknowledgement, Mae said, though I want to make sure the victims' families receive a substantial portion. Tommy, your family should get at least 700,000. The Mitchell and Graves families should receive the same. Tommy looked stunned. Mae, that's too much. We can't. You can and you will, Mae said firmly. Your great-uncle died because of Harrison Voss's greed. His family deserves restitution. What about you? Vernon asked. What will you do with your share? Mae looked around the workshop, at the tools and equipment Ezra had maintained so carefully. I'm going to restore this place. Turn it into something that honors what Ezra stood for. Craftsmanship, integrity, precision. Maybe a community workshop where people can learn traditional skills. Maybe a small museum documenting Ezra's innovations. He'd like that, Vernon said. He always believed in passing knowledge forward. Over the next few days, Mae worked with Lauren Hastings to finalize the details. The press release would go out on Monday, giving them the weekend to prepare. Hastings had already coordinated with several major news outlets. The story of a decades-old patent theft and cover-up would have wide appeal. Mae spent the weekend contacting the Mitchell and Graves families. James Mitchell's granddaughter lived in California, a retired schoolteacher named Patricia who remembered hearing stories about the mill fire from her father. When Mae explained what had happened and what they'd discovered, Patricia wept. "My father never got over losing his dad," she said. "He was only 10 when it happened. The family struggled financially for years after, and emotionally well, some wounds never heal. To know that it wasn't just an accident, that someone was responsible." Her voice broke. "Thank you for fighting for the truth." Robert Graves' son, Thomas, was in his 70s now, living in a retirement community in Arizona. His response was different: anger first, then a kind of weary relief. "I spent my whole childhood angry at Ezra Trulane," he said. "Everyone said he'd cut corners, that my dad died because some machinist didn't do his job right. I believed that for decades. And now you're telling me it was all a lie." "Yes," Mae said gently. "Ezra tried to tell people the truth, but no one would listen. God." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "I owe that man an apology, and he's been dead for months. That's going to sit heavy." "He understood," Mae said. "He never blamed the families for believing what they were told. Still, it's not right." Thomas paused. "This settlement you mentioned, I don't want it. Give my share to Trulane's family. To you, Mr. Graves, Thomas. And I mean it. Your grandfather lost everything fighting for the truth about my father's death. The least I can do is honor that sacrifice," Mae argued, but Thomas was adamant. Finally, they compromised. The Graves family's share would go into the Ezra Trulane Innovation Fund, supporting future inventors in Thomas's father's name. On Sunday evening, Mae visited Emma Rawls again. The old woman had declined noticeably in the few days since their last meeting, as if the weight she'd been carrying had been the only thing keeping her upright. "I'm tired," Emma said simply, holding Mae's hand. "But I'm at peace. For the first time in 60 years, I can think about Lucas without that knot of anger and confusion in my chest. I know what happened to him. I know it wasn't his fault." "It wasn't," Mae confirmed. "Will you do something for me?" Emma asked. "When they build this memorial, will you make sure Lucas's daughter is involved? My niece, Sarah, she lives in Seattle. She never knew her father. He died before she was born. But she deserves to be part of this." "I'll make sure," Mae promised. Emma smiled, closed her eyes, and seemed to drift into sleep. Mae sat with her for a while longer, then quietly left. Tommy was waiting in the hallway. "How is she?" "Peaceful," Mae said. "I think she's been waiting for this for a long time." Monday morning arrived with unseasonal rain, the kind that turned Bitterridge's unpaved roads to mud. Mae woke early, checking her phone obsessively for news. The press release was scheduled to go out at 9 a.m. Pacific time. At 9:03, her phone started ringing. The first call was from a reporter at the Oregonian, asking for an interview, then the Seattle Times, then NPR. By 10 a.m., Mae had fielded a dozen calls, and her email inbox was overflowing. The story was spreading faster than she'd anticipated. Social media picked it up: patent theft, corporate cover-up, a decades-long fight for justice. It had all the elements of a compelling narrative. By noon, there were reporters in Bitterridge. Mae had agreed to give a press conference at the workshop at 2 p.m., wanting to control the narrative as much as possible. Vernon helped her prepare the space, moving equipment to create an area where cameras could set up. Tommy printed copies of key documents: Ezra's blueprints, the comparison to Voss's patent, photographs of the failed brake assembly. At 1:45, journalists started arriving. Local papers, regional television stations, even a crew from a national network. Mae felt her anxiety rising. She'd never been comfortable with attention, preferred working behind the scenes. But this wasn't about her, it was about Ezra. At precisely 2 p.m., Mae stood in front of the assembled press, Vernon and Tommy flanking her. She took a breath and began. "My name is Mae Trulane. I'm the granddaughter of Ezra Trulane, who owned this machine shop from 1947 until his death earlier this year. I'm here to tell you a story about innovation, theft, and the cost of silence." She walked them through it chronologically. Ezra's skill as a machinist, his government contract work, his breakthrough brake system design, the patent filing, Harrison Voss's theft, the mill fire, the cover-up. "For 60 years, Mae said, my grandfather carried the burden of false blame. He was called incompetent, accused of cutting corners, held responsible for 3 deaths that resulted from equipment he built, but someone else corrupted. He spent 4 decades trying to clear his name, and he died without ever seeing justice." She held up the photograph of the failed brake assembly. "This is the equipment that killed Lucas Rawls, James Mitchell, and Robert Graves. My grandfather kept it all these years because he knew it was evidence. Evidence that the components were substandard, that someone had substituted cheaper parts after he'd installed the original system." Questions came rapid fire after her statement. How did she discover the truth? What prompted Consolidated to settle? What would happen to the money? Mae answered each one carefully, sticking to facts, avoiding speculation. When asked about Richard Voss's motivation for acknowledging his grandfather's crimes, she was diplomatic. "Mr. Voss chose integrity over corporate reputation. That takes courage. His grandfather created this injustice, but Richard Voss is working to make it right. That matters." A reporter from an engineering trade publication asked about the technical aspects of Ezra's design. Vernon stepped forward, explaining the innovation in terms that made clear just how sophisticated Ezra's work had been. "This wasn't just a good brake system," Vernon said. "It was revolutionary for its time. The fail-safe mechanisms, the precision engineering it, should have made industrial equipment significantly safer. Instead, the design was stolen, simplified to reduce costs, and when it failed, the man who created it was blamed." The press conference lasted 90 minutes. When it ended, Mae felt drained but oddly exhilarated. The truth was out now, in the public record, impossible to ignore or suppress. That evening, she sat in the workshop with Vernon and Tommy, watching the news coverage on Tommy's laptop. The story was everywhere: local news, national news, industry publications, social media. Ezra's face, from that 1958 photograph, appeared again and again. "He's famous," Tommy said with something like wonder. "Your grandfather is actually famous. For the right reasons, finally," Vernon added. Mae's phone rang. It was Patricia Mitchell, James's granddaughter. "I'm watching the news," Patricia said. "They're calling your grandfather a hero, a silenced innovator. Mae, I don't have words. My family's going to see this. They're going to know that my grandfather didn't die because of incompetence or bad luck. They're going to know the truth." After the call, Mae walked to the back of the workshop, to the covered crate that held the brake assembly. She pulled back the canvas and looked at the twisted metal, seeing it differently now. Not just evidence, but a memorial to 3 men whose deaths had sparked a 60-year fight for justice. Tomorrow, she would start the process of designing the permanent memorial. She would work with Sarah Rawls, Patricia Mitchell, and Thomas Graves's family to create something appropriate, something that told the truth without sensationalizing tragedy. But tonight, she wanted to honor Ezra's memory in a different way. She pulled out the leather work apron, the one that still smelled faintly of machine oil and pine. She put it on, tying it around her waist the way she remembered Ezra doing. Then she turned on the workshop lights, selected a few basic tools, and began to work. She wasn't building anything in particular, just moving through familiar motions, measuring, marking, cutting. The physical work was meditative, helping her process everything that had happened. Vernon found her an hour later, metal shavings at her feet, a simple bracket taking shape under her hands. "You're good at this," he observed. "Ezra taught me," Mae said. "I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed it." "He'd be proud of you, not just for clearing his name, but for this." Vernon gestured around the workshop. "For keeping this place alive." It's going to be more than just a live, Mae said, setting down her tools. I've been thinking about what to do with it. The community workshop idea is good, but I want to go further. I want to create a fellowship program for young machinists and craftspeople. Teach them not just the technical skills, but the ethics, the importance of integrity and precision. The Mae Trulane Fellowship, Vernon said approvingly. He'd like that. Over the next few days, the response to the news coverage exceeded Mae's expectations. Engineers and machinists from around the country reached out, many sharing their own stories of unrecognized innovation or corporate exploitation. The story had touched a nerve, resonating with people who understood the value of skilled trades and the vulnerability of individual inventors. Several universities contacted Mae about archiving Ezra's papers and blueprints. A documentary producer wanted to tell his story in depth. Industrial safety organizations asked to use his case in training materials about the importance of maintaining design specifications. But the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source. On Thursday morning, Mae received an email from the Patent and Trademark Office. They had reviewed the evidence she'd submitted as part of the consolidated settlement, and they were initiating a process to officially correct the historical record. Ezra's original 1,958 patent application would be noted as the foundational innovation, with Harrison Voss's patent reclassified as a derivative work. It was a bureaucratic detail, but it mattered. The official record would now reflect the truth. Lauren Hastings called that afternoon. The wire transfer went through. The money's in your account. Mae looked at her phone's banking app, seeing the balance that had appeared. It felt surreal, almost abstract. Numbers on a screen, representing decades of stolen work and silenced truth. "Thank you," Mae said, "for everything." "Thank you for trusting me with this case," Hastings replied. "It's rare to work on something that feels genuinely important. Most intellectual property law is about corporate interests competing with other corporate interests. This was about justice. I'm glad we got it." After the call, Mae sat at Ezra's workbench, thinking about what came next. The money meant security, the ability to rebuild her life without financial pressure. But more importantly, it meant the ability to honor Ezra's legacy properly. She pulled out a notepad and started making lists. The workshop restoration would cost around $50,000. New roof, updated electrical, proper climate control for preserving documents and equipment. The fellowship program would need an endowment to sustain itself long-term. The memorial would require design and construction costs. Then there were the distributions to the victims' families. She wanted to ensure they received their shares quickly, with no strings attached. By evening, she had a comprehensive plan. She would keep enough to live modestly for a few years while she figured out what came next. Everything else would go into trusts and funds, supporting the workshop, the fellowship, and the families who had suffered alongside Ezra. Vernon arrived as the sun was setting, carrying takeout from the diner. They ate at the workbench, talking about the future. "The town's changing its opinion about Ezra," Vernon said. "People who wouldn't say his name for years are suddenly claiming they always believed in him." Mae smiled slightly. "That's human nature, I suppose." "True. But some of it's genuine. Judith Farrow came into my store yesterday crying, said she'd carried guilt for 60 years about not speaking up, said she was grateful you'd done what she couldn't." "I had advantages she didn't," Mae said. "Time, distance, resources, and I wasn't trying to protect a family in a town where Voss controlled the economy. Still, what you did took courage." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, then Vernon spoke again. "I've been thinking. I'm 68 years old, Mae. Too old to run a hardware store much longer. What would you think about me coming to work here? Helping you build this fellowship program, teaching the traditional skills that are disappearing?" Mae felt warmth spread through her chest. "I'd think that's exactly what Ezra would have wanted." "Good. Because I'm not doing it just for Ezra. I'm doing it for me." I've spent 60 years feeling like I abandoned a friend when he needed me most. This is my chance to make that right, even if it's too late for him to know." "He knows," Mae said quietly. "Somehow, I think he knows." That night, Mae stayed late in the workshop, going through the last boxes of Ezra's papers. She found letters he'd written but never sent, to congressmen and journalists and anyone he thought might listen. Found technical journals where he'd documented every innovation, every improvement, maintaining a record even when the world didn't care. And at the very bottom of the last box, she found a letter addressed to her, dated just 2 weeks before Ezra died. Her hands shook as she opened it. Asterisk. "Dear Mae, asterisk, asterisk. If you're reading this, then you found the first letter and decided to keep looking. That means you're the person I always believed you were, someone who values truth more than comfort. Asterisk, asterisk. I'm dying, Mae. The doctors say I have weeks, maybe a month. I'm not afraid. I've lived a long life, done work I'm proud of, stood by principles even when it cost me. But I'll die with one regret, that I never cleared my name, never got justice for those 3 men who died because of another man's greed. Asterisk, asterisk. I'm asking you to carry that burden now, and I know it's not fair. You have your own life, your own struggles. But you're the only family I have left, the only one who might understand why this matters. Asterisk, asterisk. If you succeed, if you manage to expose the truth, I want you to know something important. This isn't about me. It never was. It's about the principle that truth matters, that justice matters, that we can't let the powerful rewrite history to suit their interests. Asterisk, asterisk. When you walk out of that workshop for the last time, whether you've won or lost, hold your head high. You'll have done something I couldn't. You'll have fought without carrying the weight of personal failure. You'll have fought because it was right, not because you needed vindication. Asterisk, asterisk. That's the difference between us, Mae. I always needed to prove I was right. You already know you are. Asterisk, asterisk. I love you. I always have. And I'm proud of you, regardless of what happens next. Asterisk, asterisk. Your grandfather, Ezra Times Mae, read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Ezra had known he was dying when he wrote this. Had known she might never come, might never try. But he'd trusted her anyway, placed his final hope in her hands. "We did it," she whispered to the empty workshop. "We finished what you started. You can rest now." Outside, Bitterridge settled into night. But inside the workshop, under the fluorescent lights, Mae felt the presence of something larger than herself. The weight of history, yes, but also the possibility of redemption, the chance to take something broken and make it whole again. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. The memorial to plan, the fellowship to establish, the workshop to restore. But tonight, Mae simply sat in the space Ezra had built, surrounded by his tools and his dreams, and let herself feel the satisfaction of a promise kept. The truth was out. Justice had come, late but real, and Ezra's legacy would live on, not as a cautionary tale of what happens when you stand up to power, but as an inspiration, proof that truth, however long buried, eventually finds its way to light. The television studio was smaller than Mae had expected, cramped and overheated despite the early morning hour. She sat in a chair opposite the interviewer, a woman named Rachel Torres, who hosted a regional news program that aired throughout the Pacific Northwest. Lauren Hastings had arranged the interview, believing that a longer format piece would allow Mae to tell Ezra's story more completely than the brief news segments that had aired so far. The segment would be 20 minutes, edited down from an hour-long interview. "We'll start with some background," Rachel said during the pre-interview setup. "Then move into the specifics of the theft and cover-up. I want to end with the human element, what this means for you personally, and what you hope comes from exposing the truth." Mae nodded, her mouth dry despite the water bottle a production assistant had provided. She'd never been comfortable on camera, but this was too important to let nervousness stop her. The interview began with simple questions: her relationship with Ezra, her memories of the workshop, what brought her back to Bitterridge. Mae answered carefully, aware that her words would be broadcast to hundreds of thousands of people. Then Rachel shifted to the core story. Walk us through what you discovered. How did you go from inheriting a building to uncovering a 60-year-old crime? Mae explained about the ledger, the blueprints, the failed brake assembly, about Vernon's testimony and Emma Rawls's memories, about the county records and the vault at the old consolidated headquarters. And when you finally had all the evidence, when you could prove that Harrison Voss had stolen your grandfather's patent and that his theft led to 3 deaths, what did you feel? Mae considered the question carefully. Angry at first, then sad. Not just for my grandfather, but for everyone who'd been hurt by the lie, the families of the men who died, the community that fractured over the question of blame, and Harrison Voss's own family, who built their lives on a foundation of theft without knowing it. You're surprisingly sympathetic to the Voss family. Richard Voss didn't steal anything, Mae said. He inherited a lie. When he learned the truth, he chose to acknowledge it and make amends. That took courage. I respect that. Rachel leaned forward. But doesn't it bother you that it took 60 years, that your grandfather died without ever seeing justice? Of course it bothers me, Mae said. Ezra deserved to see his name cleared while he was alive. But the fact that justice came late doesn't mean it doesn't matter. Truth has value regardless of timing. The interview moved to technical details: how Ezra's brake system worked, what made it innovative, how Voss's modifications compromised its safety. Mae was grateful. Vernon had coached her on how to explain complex engineering concepts in accessible terms. So essentially, Rachel summarized, your grandfather created something that would have saved lives, and Harrison Voss turned it into something that killed people. Yes, Mae said simply. That's exactly what happened. And the current patent system, do you think it adequately protects individual inventors like your grandfather? I think it's better than it was in the 1,960 seconds, Mae said carefully. But there are still power imbalances. Large corporations have resources that individual inventors don't: lawyers, patent research teams, the ability to tie up applications in bureaucracy. We need to do more to protect people who innovate outside of corporate structures. The final segment focused on the memorial and the fellowship program. Rachel asked about Mae's plans for the workshop, her vision for honoring Ezra's legacy. My grandfather believed in craftsmanship, Mae said. In doing things right, even when it was harder or more expensive, in maintaining standards and passing knowledge forward. The fellowship will teach technical skills, yes, but also ethics. The importance of integrity in work. Do you think that's a message young people will respond to? I think young people are hungry for meaning, Mae said, for work that matters beyond a paycheck. Craftsmanship provides that. It's tangible, it's honest, and it connects you to a lineage of people who built and fixed and made things. There's value in that. After the interview wrapped, Rachel turned off her microphone and leaned back in her chair. That was good. Really good. Your grandfather would be proud. I hope so, Mae said. I'll let you know when the segment will air. Probably Tuesday evening. And Mae, Rachel paused. Thank you for telling this story. It's easy to be cynical about business and power. It's rare to see someone actually hold them accountable. Back in Bitterridge, Mae found the town transformed. Not physically, but in its attitude toward her and toward Ezra's memory. People stopped her on the street to express support. The diner owner refused to let her pay for meals. Someone left flowers on the workshop doorstep. Judith Farrow came by in person, her eyes red from crying. I should have spoken up, she said without preamble. I knew what my husband knew about Voss, about the equipment switch. But I was scared. Scared of losing everything we had. You were protecting your family, Mae said gently. That's not something to be ashamed of. Maybe not, but silence protects the wrong people. Judith took a shaky breath. Can I do something now? Help with the memorial planning, or the fellowship, or anything? Actually, Mae said, I could use help cataloging Ezra's papers. There are years of technical journals and correspondence that need to be organized and preserved. If you're willing, I'm willing, Judith said immediately. When do I start? By the weekend, Mae had assembled a small team. Judith worked on the papers. Tommy helped with physical restoration of the workshop space. Vernon focused on developing the fellowship curriculum. And Mae coordinated everything, meeting with architects about the memorial design, talking to lawyers about establishing the proper legal structures, reaching out to potential partners and sponsors. The memorial design process proved more complex than Mae anticipated. She wanted something that honored the 3 men who died without sensationalizing their deaths. Something that told the truth about what happened without making it the central feature of their memory. She met with Sarah Rawls, Lucas's daughter, who had flown in from Seattle. Sarah was in her early 60s, a slim woman with her father's eyes. Mae recognized them from the photograph Emma had shown her. I never knew him, Sarah said as they sat in the workshop. He died before I was born. My mother remarried when I was 3, and we never talked much about my biological father. It was like he was this absent presence in my life, important but unknowable. What would you want people to know about him? Mae asked. Sarah thought for a long moment. That he was careful. My grandmother always said that. He followed safety protocols. He looked out for his co-workers. He took pride in doing his job well. I want people to know he died not because he was careless or unlucky, but because someone valued profit over human life. They worked together on the design, eventually settling on something simple and powerful. 3 bronze sculptures of workers, life-sized, positioned as if in conversation during a break. Each figure would have a plaque with the man's name, dates, and a brief description of who he was beyond his death. Lucas, the careful worker and expectant father. James, the veteran and devoted husband. Robert, the youngest of the 3, newly married and full of dreams. And beneath the sculptures, a 4th plaque explaining what had happened, not in accusatory terms, but in factual ones. Asterisk. These 3 men died on the 14th of March 1962 when industrial equipment failed at the Bitterridge mill. The brake system that failed had been modified after installation, with safety components replaced by cheaper alternatives. The original designer, Mae Trulane, had built the system to the highest standards. His design was later stolen and patented by mill owner Harrison Voss. These men died because of that theft and the cost-cutting that followed. We remember them not just as victims, but as skilled workers and family men whose lives mattered. May their memory remind us that corners cannot be cut when human lives are at stake. Asterisk. Patricia Mitchell, James's granddaughter, approved the design immediately when Mae sent her photographs and descriptions. It's perfect, she said over the phone. It honors who they were without making their deaths the only thing that defined them. The Graves family, through Thomas, also gave their blessing. My father was more than a victim, Thomas said. It's good that people will know that. The Rachel Torres interview aired on a Tuesday evening. Mae watched it at the workshop, surrounded by Vernon, Tommy, Judith, and a few others who had joined the restoration effort. Seeing herself on screen was strange and uncomfortable, but the segment itself was well done. Rachel had edited it to emphasize the human elements of the story while keeping the technical details clear. The response was immediate. Within hours, Mae's email inbox was flooded with messages. Some were from people who had experienced similar injustices, innovations stolen, credit denied, reputations destroyed. Others were from aspiring craftspeople interested in the fellowship program. Still others were simply expressions of support, people moved by Ezra's story and grateful someone had fought for the truth. One email stood out. It was from an engineering professor at Oregon State University. Asterisk. Miss Trulane, I've been teaching industrial design and safety for 30 years. I'm writing to ask permission to use your grandfather's case in my curriculum. His brake system represents exactly the kind of thoughtful, safety-first engineering we should be teaching. And his story illustrates the ethical dimensions of our work, that corners cannot be cut, that integrity matters more than profit. Would you be willing to share his original blueprints and documentation for educational purposes? Asterisk, Mae responded immediately, granting permission and offering to provide whatever materials the professor needed. This, she thought, was exactly the kind of legacy Ezra would have wanted his work living on, not just as a historical footnote, but as an active teaching tool. By the end of the week, similar requests had come from 5 other universities. Ezra's brake system design, and the story of what happened to it, was becoming part of engineering ethics education across the country. The television interview also caught the attention of the documentary filmmaker who had reached out earlier. Mae agreed to a preliminary meeting, curious about what a longer format treatment of the story might look like. The filmmaker, a woman named Jordan Chen, met Mae at the workshop. She spent an hour walking through the space, looking at the equipment and documents, asking questions about Ezra's life and work. "This is incredible," Jordan said, photographing the failed brake assembly. "It's not just a story about patent theft. It's about the erosion of skilled trades, about corporate power versus individual integrity, about the long fight for justice. There are so many layers." "I don't want it sensationalized," Mae said. "Ezra wasn't a hero in the traditional sense. He was just a man who insisted on the truth when everyone else wanted to move on." "That's what makes him heroic," Jordan countered. "Anyone can be brave for a moment. Your grandfather was brave for 40 years. That's extraordinary." They discussed the documentary structure, interviews with Mae, Vernon, and the victims' families. Historical research into the logging industry and patent law in the 1,960 seconds. Technical experts explaining Ezra's innovations, and footage of the workshop itself, this space where one man had worked and fought and refused to be silenced. "I want to end with the memorial dedication," Jordan said. "Show that this story has resolution, that justice eventually came." "When is that planned?" 4 months from now," Mae said. "Early October, before the weather turns." "Perfect. That gives us time to film everything leading up to it, then capture the memorial as the climax of the narrative." After Jordan left, Mae sat alone in the workshop, thinking about how Ezra's story was expanding beyond anything she'd imagined. It had started with a key and a note, a personal quest to understand her grandfather and clear his name. But it was becoming something larger, a symbol, a teaching tool, an inspiration to others fighting their own battles for recognition and justice. Her phone rang. It was Lauren Hastings. "Mae, I have news. Richard Voss called me this afternoon. He wants to attend the memorial dedication." Mae was surprised. "Does he think that's appropriate?" "He does. And honestly, I think he might be right. His presence would acknowledge his family's role in what happened. It would show accountability across generations." Mae considered it. "What do the victims' families think?" "I've reached out to all of them. Sarah Rawls says she'd welcome his presence. Patricia Mitchell wants to meet him first, talk to him personally. Thomas Graves is ambivalent, but not opposed." "Then yes," Mae decided. "If the families are comfortable, he should be there. This story isn't about revenge. It's about truth and reconciliation." "I'll let him know," Hastings said. "And Mae, this is shaping up to be something really significant. The press coverage, the educational interest, the memorial. You've done something important here." After the call ended, Mae walked to Ezra's workbench and ran her hand over the scarred surface. She thought about the first day she'd entered this workshop, overwhelmed by dust and grief and confusion. She'd had no idea then what she was walking into, what journey Ezra had set her on. But now, standing in this space that hummed with purpose and activity, she understood. Ezra hadn't just left her a building. He'd left her a mission, a cause, a chance to transform tragedy into meaning, and she was doing it. Step by step, day by day, she was finishing what he started. Outside, Bitterridge went about its evening business. But inside the workshop, under lights that no longer flickered, surrounded by tools that were being used again, and papers that told a story 60 years in the making, Mae Trulane felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt home. The day of the memorial dedication arrived with perfect autumn weather, crisp air, brilliant sunshine, the mountains sharp against a cloudless sky. Mae woke early in the small apartment she'd rented above the workshop, her stomach tight with nervous anticipation. The memorial stood in a small park adjacent to where the old mill had once operated. The 3 bronze figures, Lucas, James and Robert, had been installed 2 days earlier, positioned in a triangular arrangement that invited viewers to walk among them, to see them as individuals rather than as a collective tragedy. Mae had seen the sculptures during installation, but seeing them now, in the morning light, with flowers already placed at their base by early arriving family members, she felt the full weight of what they represented. 3 lives cut short, 3 families forever altered, and 1 long fight for truth finally reaching its conclusion. By 10 o'clock, people had begun gathering. Sarah Rawls arrived first, accompanied by her adult children, Lucas's grandchildren, who had never known him but carried his memory forward. Patricia Mitchell came with her sister and brother, all of them children of the man who had lost his father at 10 years old. The Graves family was represented by Thomas and his 2 daughters, 3 generations connected by loss, and now, finally, by acknowledgement. Vernon and Tommy helped Mae set up chairs and a small podium. Judith Farrow organized the reception that would follow, coordinating volunteers from the town. The documentary crew, Jordan Chen and her team, positioned cameras to capture the event without being intrusive. At 11, the crowd had swelled to over 200 people. Journalists from regional papers, engineering professors who had started using Ezra's case in their classes, former mill workers who remembered the fire, and dozens of Bitterridge residents who had known Ezra or known of him, coming to witness history being corrected. Richard Voss arrived at 11:15, accompanied only by his daughter. He'd asked permission to bring her, wanting her to understand this part of her family's history. Mae had agreed, impressed by his commitment to transparency, even with his own child. Voss approached Mae quietly. "Thank you for allowing us to be here." "Thank you for coming," Mae said. "It matters that you're willing to face this publicly." His daughter, a serious-faced girl of 12, looked at the bronze sculptures with wide eyes. "Those men died because of what my great-grandfather did?" "Yes," Voss said, not sugarcoating it. "They died because he valued money more than human life, because he stole another man's work and then cheapened it to increase profits." The girl was quiet, then said, "That's not what they teach us in school about him. They say he was a pioneer." "He was both," Mae interjected gently. "People are complicated. He did build important industries and create jobs, but he also did this. Both things are true." The ceremony began at noon. Mae had asked Emma Rawls's pastor to officiate, providing a spiritual framework without being denominational. The pastor, an older man named Reverend Michaels, spoke about truth, memory, and the long road to justice. Then Sarah Rawls stepped to the podium. "My father died 6 weeks before I was born," she said, her voice steady despite evident emotion. "I grew up with a hole where he should have been. My mother remarried, and my stepfather was good to me, but there was always this absence. And worse than the absence was the confusion. Why had my father died? Was it his fault? Could he have prevented it?" She paused, looking at the bronze figure of Lucas. "For 60 years, my family lived with uncertainty and shame. We were told the equipment failed, that maybe someone had made a mistake. We wondered if my father had done something wrong, if he'd been careless. That wondering ate at us. Her voice grew stronger. But now we know the truth. My father died because Harrison Voss stole Ezra Trulane's safety innovations and corrupted them. My father died because profit mattered more than human life. And knowing that, as painful as it is better than wondering. Truth, however hard, is better than comfortable lies. Patricia Mitchell spoke next, reading a letter her father had written late in his life, shortly before his death. In it, he described his memories of James Mitchell, the father he'd lost at 10, a man who taught him to fish, who sang off-key while working in the garden, who read bedtime stories with different voices for each character. My father never stopped missing his dad, Patricia said, but he also never stopped wondering if the accident could have been prevented. He blamed himself sometimes, thought maybe if he'd been a better son, his father wouldn't have gone to work that day. Children think that way when tragedy strikes. Now, thanks to Mae Trulane's courage and persistence, we know the truth. My grandfather's death wasn't fate or bad luck or anyone's fault except the man who chose greed over safety. Thomas Graves spoke briefly, his voice rough with age and emotion. My father was 23 when he died. I was 3. I have no memories of him, just photographs and stories. For most of my life, I blamed Ezra Trulane for my father's death. I believed the lies because I needed someone to blame, and Ezra was the name everyone mentioned. I was wrong. I owe that man an apology I can never deliver. The best I can do is stand here today and say clearly, Ezra Trulane was not responsible. Harrison Voss was, and I'm grateful finally to know the truth. Then Mae stepped to the podium. She'd prepared remarks, written and rewritten them a dozen times, but now, facing the crowd, she set her notes aside. My grandfather, Ezra Trulane, was a machinist. That might not sound impressive to modern ears, but it was his identity, his calling. He believed that good work mattered, that precision and care weren't optional extras but essential principles. When he designed the brake system that should have kept these 3 men safe, he built it to the highest standards. He tested every component, verified every specification, installed it personally to ensure it was done right. She looked at the bronze sculptures. And then someone changed it. Swapped out the parts he'd carefully chosen for cheaper alternatives, took his innovation and corrupted it. When it failed and men died, my grandfather was blamed. He spent 40 years fighting to clear his name, to prove that the equipment as he built it was safe, that the failure came from modifications he never authorized. Mae's voice caught slightly. He died without seeing justice, but before he died, he left me a key, a note, and a workshop full of evidence. He asked me to finish what he couldn't. And today, standing here with the families of the men who died, with a community finally acknowledging the truth, I can say we did it. We finished it. She gestured to Richard Voss, who stood at the back of the crowd. I want to acknowledge Richard Voss, who's here today despite the difficulty of facing his family's history. When confronted with evidence of his grandfather's crimes, he chose honesty over denial. He chose restitution over legal maneuvering. That took courage, and it matters. This memorial exists because he was willing to acknowledge uncomfortable truths. Voss looked uncomfortable with the attention, but didn't look away. The final speaker was Vernon Keppel. I was Ezra's apprentice, Vernon said simply. I worked alongside him, learned from him, watched him build that brake system with a precision and care that I've never seen matched. When it failed, when men died, I knew something was wrong. I knew Ezra hadn't made mistakes. But I was young and scared, and I didn't speak up. For 60 years, I've carried the guilt of that silence. His voice grew firmer. I can't undo my silence, but I can speak now. Ezra Trulane was the best machinist I've ever known, and more than that, he was a man of integrity. He refused to compromise his standards, even when it would have been easier or more profitable. When his work was stolen and corrupted, he fought back not for money or fame, but because truth mattered to him. That's rare. That's worth honoring. After the speeches, Reverend Michaels led a moment of silence. 200 people stood quietly in the autumn sunshine, remembering 3 men who died and 1 man who fought for them. Then the pastor blessed the memorial, and it was done. The reception that followed was held in a community hall, food and coffee provided by volunteers. Mae moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations, answering questions, feeling overwhelmed by the warmth directed toward her. Richard Voss approached her near the end, his daughter beside him. "My daughter wanted to say something to you," he said. The girl looked nervous but determined. "I learned in school that it's important to acknowledge mistakes and try to make them right. My great-grandfather made terrible mistakes, and my dad is trying to make them right. I think that's brave. And I think what you did fighting for your grandfather even after he died, that's brave too." Mae felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you. That means a lot. When I'm older," the girl continued, "when I take over the company, I want to make sure we do things the right way your grandfather would have done them." Voss looked at his daughter with unmistakable pride. "We're establishing new protocols for patent development and workplace safety, making sure this never happens again. It's too late for your grandfather and those 3 men, but maybe we can prevent future tragedies." "That's what Ezra would have wanted," Mae said. "Not revenge, but change, making sure his fight mattered beyond just clearing his name." As the reception wound down, Mae found herself standing with Sarah, Patricia, and Thomas, the 3 representatives of the families whose lives had been altered by that long-ago tragedy. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "After today, after all this attention dies down?" "The workshop continues," Mae said. "The fellowship program launches next spring. Ezra's designs will be taught in engineering schools. And this memorial stands as a permanent reminder that truth matters, that justice matters, even when it takes 60 years. "Will you stay in Bitterridge?" Patricia asked. Mae looked around the community hall, at the people who had shown up to witness truth being honored. "Yes, this is home now. This is where the work is." That evening, after everyone had left and the chairs had been put away, Mae walked back to the memorial. The bronze figures glowed in the fading light, 3 men frozen in a moment of ordinary humanity, talking, resting, simply being. She placed her hand on the plaque bearing Lucas Rawls's name. "He did it," she said quietly, as if Lucas could hear her. "Ezra proved what happened. Your family knows the truth now. Everyone knows." Vernon found her there, standing among the sculptures as darkness fell. "It's over," he said simply. "No," Mae corrected. "It's beginning. The memorial is finished, but the work continues. The fellowship, the workshop. Ezra would be proud, not just of what you accomplished, but of what you're building." They stood together in the gathering darkness, 2 people connected by 1 man's legacy and 1 long fight for truth. Above them, stars began appearing in the darkening sky. In the distance, the lights of Bitterridge glowed softly. And in the park, 3 bronze figures stood eternal watch, remembering the past while pointing toward a future where such tragedies might be prevented. Mae took one last look at the memorial, then turned toward the workshop. There was work to do tomorrow, fellowship applications to review, workshop renovations to oversee, the continuing task of turning Ezra's legacy into something living and vital. But tonight, she allowed herself to feel complete satisfaction. They had finished what Ezra started. They had brought truth into the light. They had honored 3 men who died and 1 man who refused to let their deaths be forgotten. Justice, Mae thought, was not just about punishment or restitution. It was about memory, about refusing to let comfortable lies replace difficult truths. It was about standing up when everyone else sat down, about speaking when silence would be easier. Ezra had done that for 40 years. And now, his story would ensure that others might find the courage to do the same. 6 months after the memorial dedication, Mae stood in the workshop on a Saturday morning, watching the first cohort of fellowship students set up their workstations. There were 8 of them, 5 young people fresh out of high school or community college, 2 mid-career changers looking for meaningful work, and 1 retired teacher who had always wanted to learn metalworking. Vernon moved among them with easy authority, demonstrating how to properly maintain hand tools, explaining the logic behind the workshop's organization. "Everything has a place," he was saying. "Not because we're obsessive, but because knowing where your tools are saves time and prevents mistakes. Efficiency starts with organization." The workshop itself had been transformed. The roof was new, the electrical system updated to modern code, the windows replaced with energy-efficient versions that let in better light. But the essential character remained. Ezra's pegboard still lined the walls, his workbench still anchored the center of the space, his tools still hung in their outlined positions. Mae had added a small museum area in one corner, glass cases displaying Ezra's original blueprints, the patent documents, photographs from his life, and samples of his work. Visitors could see the failed brake assembly, now mounted in a secure display with explanatory text. They could read Harrison Voss's journal entry admitting his guilt. They could understand the full story of what happened and why it mattered. The fellowship program had attracted national attention. Applications had come from across the country, far more than the 8 spots available. Mae and Vernon had spent weeks reviewing them, looking for candidates who showed both technical aptitude and ethical awareness. People who understood that skilled work carried moral obligations. "Miss Trulane?" One of the students, a 19-year-old named Marcus, approached hesitantly. "I wanted to thank you again for this opportunity. My high school guidance counselor said I should go to college, get a business degree. But I've always loved working with my hands. This feels more real than anything else I've done." "That's what Ezra believed," Mae said. "That there's dignity in making things, in understanding how things work. You're carrying that forward now." The fellowship ran for 1 year, combining hands-on training with classroom instruction in engineering principles, safety protocols, and business ethics. Students would learn to fabricate, to repair, to innovate. But they would also learn about Ezra's story, about what happens when corners get cut, when profit matters more than principle. Tommy Rawls had become Mae's assistant director, handling logistics and helping develop curriculum. He'd found his calling in education, discovering that he loved teaching almost as much as he loved the craft itself. "The documentary's coming together," Tommy said, joining Mae as she watched the students work. "Jordan sent me a rough cut. It's powerful. Really captures not just what happened, but why it matters." The documentary, tentatively titled "The Long Fight, One Man's 40-Year Battle for Justice," would premiere at a film festival in the spring, then be released more broadly. Jordan had done remarkable work, interweaving Ezra's story with broader themes about intellectual property, corporate accountability, and the value of skilled trades. "She wants you to do a Q&A after the premiere," Tommy continued. "Said people will have questions about the fellowship and the workshop." "I can do that," Mae said. The past 6 months had been exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. Mae had distributed the settlement money as planned, substantial amounts to the victims' families, enough to provide security if not wealth. The Ezra Trulane Innovation Fund was fully established and already making its first grants to independent inventors seeking patent protection. The workshop had become a gathering place, hosting community events and open houses where people could see traditional crafts in action. And Mae herself had changed. She'd arrived in Bitterridge, broken and directionless, carrying decades of accumulated regret and confusion. She was leaving behind the person who had run from difficulty, who had let shame and uncertainty drive her away from the only home she'd known. The woman she was becoming stood her ground, faced hard truths, fought for what mattered. Betsy Kimball from the library had become a regular visitor, helping catalogue Ezra's papers and creating an archive that scholars could access. Universities were already requesting materials for research projects on industrial history, patent law, and engineering ethics. Judith Farrow had found purpose in the work, her guilt transforming into determination. She'd taken on the role of workshop historian, maintaining the museum displays and leading tours for school groups and interested visitors. Even Richard Voss stayed involved, attending fellowship graduations and funding scholarships through his company. His presence remained somewhat controversial. Some people couldn't separate him from his grandfather's crimes, but Mae respected his commitment to making amends. The town of Bitterridge itself was changing, albeit slowly. The workshop had become a point of pride, a destination that brought visitors and attention. Other small businesses were starting to open, entrepreneurs drawn by the story and the sense of possibility. It wasn't a renaissance, not yet, but it was movement in the right direction. Mae's phone rang. It was Lauren Hastings. "Good news," the attorney said. "The Patent Office has officially corrected the record. Ezra's 1,958 application is now noted as the foundational innovation, with full credit given to his original work. It's in the permanent record now." "Thank you," Mae said, "for everything. Thank you for trusting me with this case. It's rare to work on something that feels genuinely significant. Most intellectual property law is just corporations fighting over money. This was about justice and truth. I'm glad we got it." After the call, Mae walked to the museum corner and looked at Ezra's photograph. That young man, in 1958, standing proudly beside machinery he'd helped create. She thought about how his life had unfolded from that moment. The theft, the fire, the decades of fighting, the isolation and frustration, the stubborn refusal to let injustice stand. "We did it," she said softly to the photograph. "Everything you asked for. Your name is clear. The truth is known. Your work is being honored and taught. You can rest now." Vernon appeared beside her. "Talking to him again?" "Always," Mae admitted. "Is that strange?" "Not at all. I talk to him too. Usually when I'm trying to solve a technical problem, I ask myself what Ezra would do, how he'd approach it." Vernon smiled. "He's still teaching us, even now." "He is," Mae agreed. That afternoon, Mae drove to the memorial. It had become part of her routine, visiting once a week to ensure the bronze figures were maintained, the flowers were fresh, the plaques were clean. Today, she found Emma Rawls's niece, Sarah, standing before Lucas's sculpture. "I come here every time I visit my kids," Sarah said. "I never got to know him in life, but I feel like I know him now." "Mae, what you did, giving him back his dignity, telling the truth about how he died, it matters more than I can express." "I just finished what Ezra started," Mae said. "You did more than that. You transformed tragedy into meaning. You made sure 3 deaths weren't forgotten or explained away." Sarah touched her father's bronze hand gently. "Thank you." After Sarah left, Mae sat on a bench near the memorial, watching afternoon sunlight play across the sculptures. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the bus ride to Bitterridge, the dusty workshop, the discovery of secrets and lies. The slow unraveling of truth, the building of evidence, the fight for justice. It had changed her fundamentally. She discovered strength she didn't know she had, purpose she'd been seeking without knowing it. She'd learned that running from difficulty didn't make it disappear, that facing truth, however painful, was better than living with comfortable lies. Her phone chimed with a text from one of the fellowship students asking a technical question about lathe operation. Mae smiled and typed back a detailed answer, including a diagram. This was her life now, teaching, preserving, honoring Ezra's legacy while building something new. As the sun dropped toward the mountains, casting long shadows across the park, Mae stood and placed her hand once more on the plaque between the 3 bronze figures. "Lucas Rawls, James Mitchell, Robert Graves," she read aloud. Your deaths were not in vain. Your memory drives us to do better, to build safer, to value human life above profit. Rest in peace." Walking back to her truck, Mae felt a profound sense of completion. Not ending the work would continue, the fellowship would grow, the story would be told and retold. But completion of a specific task, a promise kept, a debt honored, Ezra had left her a key to unlock the workshop. But what he'd really given her was a key to unlock truth, to open doors that power and money had tried to keep closed. And in doing so, he'd given her back herself, the Mae who didn't run from difficulty, who stood for principle, who finished what she started. She drove through Bitterridge as evening settled over the town. Lights came on in houses and shops, the mountains darkened against the sky. This place that had once been just a painful memory was now home in the truest sense, a place where she belonged, where her work mattered, where she'd found purpose. At the workshop, lights still burned. Through the windows, she could see students working late, Vernon demonstrating something at the main workbench. The building that had stood silent and abandoned for so long hummed now with life and activity. Mae parked and sat for a moment, just looking at the scene. Then she pulled out the brass key, the one Ezra had left her, the one that had started everything. She no longer needed it. The workshop had a modern lock now, and she had a dozen copies of the new key. But this key, Ezra's key, had symbolic weight. It represented trust, legacy, the passing of responsibility from one generation to the next. Mae climbed out of the truck and walked to the workshop door. Inside, students looked up and waved. Vernon called out a greeting. Tommy gestured her over to look at something one of the students had fabricated. This was Ezra's gift, not just a building or tools or even truth, but purpose. The chance to transform tragedy into meaning, to take a life's worth of fighting and turn it into something that would help others. Mae hung the brass key on a special hook by the door, beside Ezra's leather work apron. Visitors could see them there, the key that unlocked truth, the apron worn by hands that refused to compromise. Together, they told a story about integrity, persistence, and the long fight for justice. "All right," Mae said, joining the students at the workbench. "Let's see what you've built." And in that moment, surrounded by the tools Ezra had used, teaching the skills he had mastered, carrying forward the principles he had lived by, Mae Trulane knew she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The workshop door stood open, light spilling out into the evening. Inside, the work continued, the patient, precise, principled work of making things right, just as Ezra had done for so many years, just as Mae would do for all the years ahead.